Thank you for listening to Shooting Straight, a wild Western adventure. Don't miss a single brand new audiobook when you hit the subscribe button above. Saddle up and let's ride. Chapter 1. A man, gaunt and ghostly, his face the color of old cheese, arrived at Calico Springs. He dismounted, drank briefly from the cool water, and trudged up the path to the Ford ranch house. "Hello," he called. "Hey. Nora." Nora Ford. His shout turned into a violent fit of coughing. A slim girl with blonde hair and tragic eyes beneath dark brows hurried to the door. Her expression showed readiness for anything. Life near Calico Hole, the Diego outlaws' hideout, had taught her to expect wounded, often dying men. This man, with his wasted, cheese-colored face, stopped her cold. "Come in," she said, her voice steady. "Why, it's Bud Cole." "What's left of him?" Cole rasped. "A year in Beasley's jail did this to me. A year held for trial for a crime I didn't commit. A year in a cell so damp the walls sweat. Ever seen stone walls sweat?" Nora shuddered, dread tightening her chest. Maybe her twin brother Noah looked like Cole now. Months in Beasley's jail had worn him down, and his trial kept getting postponed for mysterious reasons. "Tell me the truth, Bud," Nora said sharply. "How is Noah? Have you seen him?" "You Fords always face the music, Nora, so I'll give it to you straight. No, sick, real sick. He's 20, but he looks 40. That's why I'm here. Rip Campbell, his cellmate, knew they'd let me go, so he slipped me this note. Beasley won't let prisoners talk to each other." Nora unfolded a small square of soiled paper and read, "Dear Miss Ford, please be a quarter of a mile north of the jail farm Friday night at 9 o'clock. Bring another girl with you, one span of fast horses hitched to a buckboard, and 2 good saddle horses. Hide in the willow thicket, and don't leave until I tell you to." The note bore no signature. A man planning a jailbreak wouldn't risk identifying himself. Nora studied the handwriting. The bold strokes suggested a man accustomed to commanding and expecting obedience. He needed her help to commit a crime. He must know enough about her to believe she'd do anything to free Noah. The buckboard, the extra girl, the saddle horses, Campbell clearly intended to bring someone else. That someone had to be Noah. "What kind of man is Campbell, Bud?" Nora asked. "He's like a tiger," Cole said. "Always moving, full of fury but holding it back. He's got more self-control than any man I've seen. Beasley couldn't break him, but—" "Yes," she pressed. "He started cracking after they put him in Noah's cell," Cole admitted. "What's he in for?" "He tried to rob the bank at Wagon Gap." An odd expression crossed Cole's face. "The fool," Nora exclaimed. "Even Diego wouldn't try that. Rip Campbell did. Now he's planning a jailbreak." Cole nodded toward the lower country where Beasley's jail stood. "That's never been done, either. I'd better go." "Were you acquitted of that cattle-rustling charge?" Nora asked. He hung his head. "I never rustled those cows, but they wouldn't let me prove it. They just kept postponing the trial. I've got a wife and kids to think of, so when they offered to drop the charges if I left the country, I took it." "And left your ranch?" "Yes. I couldn't rot in that cell anymore." "I don't blame you," Nora said. "If I can get Noah away from that jail and keep him out of Diego's gang, I'll gladly leave Calico Springs. Noah comes first. He's all I have." "Good luck," Cole replied, doubt shadowing his face. He suspected Campbell's help would come with a price. Before leaving, he turned back. "Campbell claims he's fallen for your picture, Nora." Her jaw tightened. "He talked about me." "Nothing bad," Cole said. "Just mooned over your picture. Noah mentioned it." Nora studied the note again. "Molly Geary's the only one I can ask to come along. She loves Noah enough to take the risk." Thursday morning, Nora hitched 2 horses to the buckboard, tied 2 saddle horses behind, and loaded canteens and saddles. By noon, she reached Chris Geary's ranch. Molly, slim and graceful, hurried from the house, sunlight catching her dark red hair. She's beautiful, Nora thought. She'll make Noah a wonderful wife, if we can get them out of the country. The 2 girls kissed cheeks, their understanding unspoken. It's been so long since we've seen him, Molly said wistfully. Yes, but read this, Nora replied, handing her the note. Why would Campbell help Noah? Molly asked after reading it. I'm suspicious. He knows enough about me to think I'll stop at nothing to free Noah. Of course, I'm the other girl, Molly said. Dad'll tan my hide if he finds out, but I'm 18, and I know my own mind. I'll tell him we're going to town, Nora suggested. That'll work, Molly agreed. That afternoon and evening, they planned every detail. Everything was ready. Nora and Noah planned to leave Calico Springs and notify Molly once they settled. Molly agreed to ship their belongings, arrange for trusted men to drive the cattle, and join them later. Nora and Noah left extra horses outside town, shopped around, and departed at dusk. After nightfall, they retrieved the horses and crept to the rendezvous point. Before them stretched the wide expanse of the jail farm. Behind them lay hard ground, a dusty road, and a railway track. The station and town sat a mile east of the jail. Crickets chirped in the thicket where the girls crouched, their song blending with the faint murmur of a creek. Overhead, stars hung low, sharp, and bright. Time dragged as the girls strained to spot movement near the dark silhouette of the jail. Dim lights flickered faintly from the dreary structure, a reminder of the dank cells inside. Molly broke the silence with a whisper. Nora, I'm scared, she said. Not for me. For Noah. Dad told me the guards carry sawed-off shotguns and Henry rifles. Shish, Nora said, resting a comforting hand on Molly's trembling shoulder. Better to die fighting than waste away in Beasley's hell. Why don't they kick him out? Molly asked. He's too powerful politically, Nora answered. The whispers eased the tension, better than the silence filled with fearful thoughts. Why don't Jesse Temple or the Texas Rangers stop him? Molly pressed. They've dealt with crooked politicians before. Jesse Temple? Nora's voice brimmed with scorn. The so-called greatest ranger of our time. When someone suggested he go after Diego, he conveniently fell ill and ran off to Cuba or somewhere to rest. And Diego killed Temple's brother. Some hero. The shriek of a locomotive whistle pierced the quiet, startling Molly. Easy, Nora warned. The train stopped briefly, the clank of empty cattle cars echoing in the night, then rattled on. When will we know? Molly asked. When we see 2 figures coming out of the dark, Nora replied. If there's an uproar. Flames flared suddenly in the distance, followed by the heavy boom of a shotgun. Another shot fired from the right, then the left. A man screamed, tore through the night. Molly jumped to her feet. I'm going out there, she said. No, Nora said firmly. Campbell's orders were clear, don't leave. Damn Rip Campbell, Molly snapped. What if Noah's hurt and needs us? Nora, holding back tears, forced herself to stay calm as the jail siren wailed. Ooh! Rifle fire crackled in the darkness, bullets snapping twigs and leaves overhead. Down! Nora ordered. There! Molly cried. A big man, carrying Noah. The man staggered into the thicket, panting. Miss Ford, he said, voice low but urgent. Drive the buckboard to the road. No's fine. I screamed to throw them off. Come, Molly, Nora commanded, running to the buckboard. Rip Campbell's quiet intensity made Nora's pulse race for reasons she couldn't explain. She drove the buckboard to the road, halting the horses. Campbell placed Noah on the seat and kicked off his shoes. Put these over your shoes, he instructed Molly. He removed his own shoes and handed them to Nora. Put these on and cross the road after we pass, he said. Step in our wheel tracks. Beasley's posse will think the buckboard isn't involved. I understand, Nora said. Then climb the fence and scramble up the roadbed, leaving plenty of shoe tracks, Campbell continued. One of you take off a shoe and shove it under a rail as if it got caught. Toss the others into an empty car as the freight passes. Walk along the right-of-way, sticking to the ties for a distance, then cross back to the road and return to your horses. Campbell cracked the whip, and the buckboard vanished. He planned everything, Nora said, even timing the brake with the passing freight train. Beasley's posse will follow the tracks, find the shoe under the rail, and think Rip and Noah boarded the train. Meanwhile, they'll head for Calico Springs. Come on. The girls followed his instructions to the letter. They crouched several hundred yards down the track from the spot where they left the shoe. As the freight thundered past, they hurled the remaining shoes into an empty car. They reached their horses, mounted, and rode off in the opposite direction. They skirted the town to avoid questioning, then doubled back and took the Calico Springs road. Chapter 2. When Nora and Molly reached the Geary Ranch, Molly glanced briefly at her home and shook her head. I only saw Noah for a moment in the dark, she said. I'm going with you, Nora. We'll need to plan. And we have very little time to do it, Nora added. The posse will search the freight train, find nothing, and head straight for Calico Springs. Whatever we do must happen before they arrive. They rode on, as dawn broke over Calico Ridge. The ridge's sheer walls shimmered with yellows, blues, tans, and greens, framing the springs and the ranch nestled snugly beneath. It's so beautiful here, Molly said. It makes me sick to think you have to leave it all. Yes, Nora replied, her voice heavy. But what choice do we have? They stole our cattle. To get them back, Noah joined Diego, and now the law brands him a rustler. Staying here means Noah returns to jail, and that would kill him. Yet. Her gaze swept the rolling hills and lush grazing land. 5 generations of Fords have lived here. Leaving will tear something out of me by the roots. They dismounted at the ranch, and a shy Indian boy ran up to take the horses. Has anyone been here, Jose? Nora asked. Noah. Or a stranger? The boy stiffened at Noah's name but shook his head. Nobody, he said. The day dragged in tense anticipation as they scanned the lower country for dust clouds. Where could they be? Molly asked, her voice tight with worry. They're probably sticking to back roads to avoid being seen, Nora said. Noah learned a lot about being elusive from Diego. Jose's mother prepared supper, while hoofbeats shattered the stillness. 2 lathered horses pulled a battered buckboard into the yard. Rip Campbell leapt to the ground, his presence drawing every eye. Nora's focus, however, stayed on her twin brother. Noah, once a robust 170, now looked gaunt and hollow, barely 130 pounds. His skin stretched tightly over his cheekbones, parchment-like and sallow. Sunken eyes and claw-like hands added to his skeletal appearance. Sis, he rasped. Molly. He threw his frail arms around them, and they lifted him off the ground in a fierce embrace. Tears flowed freely. Poor boy. Molly sobbed. They've nearly killed you. If I died, I wouldn't have been the first, Noah said bitterly. And all because someone wants this land. I've thought about it, but I can't figure it all out, though Beasley's part of it. He glanced around nervously, but managed a ghost of a smile. The old place looks good. And you both look good. Where were you hiding? Nora asked. The only place left, Noah replied. Pedro Diego's camp in Calico Hole. Nora drew a sharp breath, but held back her objections. Now wasn't the time. We're forgetting Rip, Noah said, introducing the big man. The best friend a guy could ask for. Nora, I want you to like him. Rip's blue eyes crinkled with a warm smile, but something heavier lurked behind it, a weight Nora couldn't ignore. His rugged face carried an intensity that unsettled her. She sensed a man on a relentless path, one he wouldn't deviate from. "Beasley says they have a special hell for cattle rustlers and bank robbers," Noah said. "He tried to send us there, didn't he, Rip?" "He sure did," Rip replied. His curly hair needed a trim, and dark stubble shadowed his strong jaw. Though tanned, a faint yellow hue, like nose, had started to creep into his skin. "Supper's ready," the Indian woman called. "I'll take care of the horses. Jose will watch the road for anyone coming." "Come on," Nora urged, motioning toward the house. "Just a second," Noah replied. "The air feels good in my lungs, and I'd rather look at the range than those sweating walls, but the light hurts my eyes." "Come on, Noah," Molly pleaded, unable to bear the haunted look on his face. Anger stirred deep inside her, making her want to kill Beasley and men like him. The girls ate more than the men. Prison life had shrunk Noah's stomach, and he struggled to keep down the rich food. When the meal ended, Nora broke the silence. "Every minute counts. Let's plan for the future. We'll have to give up the ranch." "Like hell we will," Noah snapped. "That's exactly what they want. Like hell." His words dissolved into a coughing fit. Nora turned to Rip Campbell, whose gaze hadn't strayed from her throughout the meal. "What are your plans, Mr. Campbell?" "My plans?" Rip repeated. "I'll throw in with Diego, if he'll have me. I need $10,000 to start a ranch, and that's the quickest way to get it." He smiled, a disarming grin that might have been charming under different circumstances. "Why not come with Noah and me?" Nora suggested. "Make a fresh start. You can't win at this game." "Diego seems to be winning," Rip said. "Has he been bothering you, Nora?" Noah interrupted, his sunken eyes probing hers. "Has he been asking to marry you?" "He hasn't been annoying me much," she replied carefully. "Diego seems to be beating the game," Rip repeated. "You've got to admit that," Noah said. Jesse Temple nailed One-Eyed Dravis, Spike Fortune, and Apache Grim, but when Diego's name came up, Temple suddenly went on vacation. "That's hard to believe," Rip observed. "I don't know," Noah said. "Even Temple wants to stay alive. Have you heard the story of Diego's initials?" "Let's hear it," Rip said, glancing at Jose, who stood watchfully outside. "Diego carved his initials into the graves of his enemies," Noah explained. "The P came from 5 deputy sheriffs he buried, with a 6th standing upright as the period. The S formed from the graves of 3 Texas Rangers and 2 sheriffs who tried to take him alive at Calico Hole." "And the period?" Rip asked. "Diego already dug that grave," Noah said grimly. "It's waiting for Jesse Temple. Can you blame the man for taking a vacation?" Noah fixed his eyes on Rip, waiting for his reaction to the macabre tale. "Yes, I blame Temple," Rip said firmly. "One of the Rangers was his brother. A real man would keep fighting until he avenged that. But why does any of this matter to me?" "Diego survives by staying careful," Noah said. "If he doesn't trust someone coming into Calico Hole, he kills them. And if you get past Diego, you'll meet El Severo. His name means the Grim in Spanish. He's deaf, dumb, and dangerous, a man with a sixth sense for trouble. And he holds some strange sway over Diego," Nora added. "That man gives me the creeps." "I'll take the risk," Rip said, his voice resolute. "That outfit intrigues me." "I'm with you," Noah said. "Noah!" the girls cried in unison. "Not again," Nora pleaded, her voice trembling. "Not to Diego. Not the outlaw's life. It ends with a rope or a cell." "I'm nearly dead already," Noah replied. "Without Rip, I'd be gone. I owe him my life, and I intend to repay that debt." Nora felt the weight of his quietly spoken promise, knowing dark days lay ahead. "Forget it, Noah," Rip said. You don't owe me anything. Listen to your sister. Leave here. Start over. No, Rip, Noah insisted. I'm with you, and no one will stop me. When you're safe, I'll pick up where I left off. Noah, Molly whispered, her voice soft and full of pain, don't I mean anything to you? Everything, Molly, Noah assured her. But I'm sticking with Rip. Nora turned to Rip Campbell, understanding her brother wouldn't back down. Rumors had reached her that Rip had fallen for her photograph during his solitary hours. Maybe she could sway him. She painted a hopeful picture of the four of them starting fresh together. For a moment, his eyes brightened, but the unyielding drive within him soon returned. I need $10,000 to develop the place I have in mind, he said. I've decided to throw in with Diego if he'll take me. Before Nora could argue further, Rip leaped to his feet. Jose's coming fast, he shouted. They rushed to meet the boy at the door. From his frantic mix of Mexican, Indian, and English, they pieced together the news. A large group of men was closing in. Jose and his mother hurried to the barn and returned with fresh horses already saddled. Nora helped Noah mount. As he galloped off, she handed a rifle to Rip. It's loaded, she called. There's more ammo in the saddlebags. Let the horse lead. It knows the way to Calico Hole. At the bend in the road, Rip glanced back. Nora stood on the porch, dejection etched in her posture, lit by the lamp the Indian woman held. Rip cradled the rifle in his arm and let the horse run free. He noted the Ford Ranch's excellent horses. His mount was sure-footed and full of spirit. Within 10 minutes, the West Valley wall loomed high into the night sky. Rip looked back and spotted sparks flying from a horse's shoe striking flint far below. The brief flashes repeated, confirming the posse was heading straight for Calico Hole. They're cutting us off, Noah called. Keep riding, Rip replied. I'll hold them back. He dismounted, moved a few paces, and fired hastily. The posse's return fire lit up the spot where his rifle had flashed. He heard the sound of boots hitting rocks. They had dismounted and taken cover. Rip mounted again and closed the gap between himself and Noah, who had paused ahead. Minutes later, they passed unchallenged through a narrow canyon no wider than 100 feet, its sheer walls towering over 1,000 feet high before widening into even taller cliffs. We'll camp here tonight, Noah said, reining in his horse. In the starlight, Rip made out a clearing, about 200 feet long and 100 feet wide. The faint sound of trickling water reached him, mingling with the soft whisper of wind over dry grass. We'll picket the horses, Noah said, then turn in. There's a shack by the wall with some bunks. What about the posse? They wouldn't come in here for $1,000, Noah replied. They don't know what they're up against and won't take the risk. And what are we up against? Plenty. Barbed wire strung across the gap 100 yards up the trail, Noah said. Behind it, a couple of men with Winchesters. It's been a long day. I've made it this far, thanks to you, Rip. Noah dragged his saddle from the horse and stumbled into the cabin, collapsing into a straw-filled bunk. Within moments, he was snoring. Sleep didn't come easily to Rip Campbell. He questioned the kind of reception awaiting him here and wondered about El Severo. Could the man truly read someone's character, or did he judge on a whim? Well, Rip concluded, there's a better chance inside the hole than outside. When he opened his eyes, daylight illuminated the canyon. The rising sun revealed every detail of the vibrant rock and ledges. As sunlight spilled over a slope, Rip's gaze fell on the grim graves of 11 sheriffs and rangers. Even at a distance, Pedro Diego's initials stood clear, the P formed by 6 graves, the S by 5, and an ominously empty grave waiting to punctuate the gruesome scene. A period reserved for Jesse Temple. Chapter 3. Rip Campbell inspected the barbed wire, stretched across the entrance to Calico Hole's main section. No horse could navigate it in the dark, though a twisting lane allowed safe passage during daylight. A rifleman perched on a ledge 200 yards away kept watch over the barbed wire and the narrow gap in the canyon walls. Above the rifle, a dark head emerged. The outlaw's sentry. "That guy won't budge," Noah said, nodding toward the guard. "His job's to stay put. We can get through, but coming back won't be easy. I didn't want to bring this up now, but the posse forced our hand. Rip, this plan worries me." "How are you holding up, Noah?" Rip asked. "Fine. Why wouldn't I be?" "I'm free," Noah replied, but his gaunt frame betrayed him. Rip saw the truth. Noah's freedom wouldn't heal him. He needed food, rest, and care. "No turning back now," Noah added. "Might as well see it through." Rip saddled the horses while Noah led the way through the barbed wire. The guard, recognizing Noah, shouted something in greeting. Noah waved back. Rip halted near the slope where Diego's initials loomed. Graves, angled to form the letters, stood out starkly against green grass, their mounds whitewashed. Suddenly, hoofbeats echoed in the canyon. Noah twisted in his saddle, his face pale. "It's Nora," he groaned. Nora Ford appeared on a spirited mare, her cheeks flushed. "Don't scold me," she said before her brother could speak. "You shouldn't be here," Noah said, his voice strained. "You know what this means. You can't leave now. Diego will never let you go." "I thought about that," Nora replied, "but it doesn't matter. You're all I have, and you need help. You're sick, Noah. You've been running on nerves, and once you're back with Diego's gang, you'll crash." "I'm not worth it," Noah muttered. "If I'd known you'd follow, I'd have stayed in Beasley's jail." Rip noticed Noah's anxiety growing. Nora's gaze shifted to the graves, and she shuddered. "So that's the slope with Diego's initials," she said. "The man's a monster." "Stop it," Noah warned. "Out there you could speak freely, but inside Calico Hole, keep your mouth shut, especially about Diego." "I understand," she murmured, her eyes lingering on the graves. "Still, I'd rather be Jesse Temple, buried in that grave, than alive knowing Diego was hunting me." "Temple's no fool," Noah said. "He knows stepping into the hole is suicide without an army of rangers. Come on, Rip. Time to face the music." They rounded a rocky outcrop, revealing the outlaw hideout a quarter-mile ahead. Fine horses grazed in a pasture fed by a small stream. Water tumbled down from the ridges, falling 2,000 feet, before spreading across the canyon floor. Fertile land grew crops, and fenced areas held cattle. Diego's men lived well. "Those horses," Noah said, "are trophies from raids on the Southwest's best ranches. Even the Twin F Ranch can't match them." They rode toward a cluster of cabins perched on a low ridge. The largest, a 2-story log building with wide windows and a shaded piazza, stood under trees. "Diego's place," Noah said. "That's where we report." As they dismounted, men emerged from an adobe building. They greeted Noah warmly, cast approving glances at Nora, and eyed Rip with suspicion. "Where's Diego?" Noah asked. "Ah, my friend, and my friend's sister," a voice called. "Hello, Diego," Noah replied. "We barely made it. Beasley's men were right behind us. This is Rip Campbell. He got me out of jail." "Rip Campbell?" Diego's calculating expression softened into a smile. "I had hoped it was Jesse Temple, come to accept my hospitality. But no matter. Campbell, how old are you?" 25, Rip said, recognizing the geniality as a mask for suspicion. A dozen men surrounded them. Their hard faces matched the wanted posters Rip had seen. Practiced movements, cold eyes, and bowed legs spoke of lives spent in the saddle. "You're young," Diego said, "but you seem seasoned. Have you led a dangerous life, or has life been dangerous to you?" Before Rip could answer, a stocky man emerged from the cabin and took a position behind Diego. Diego turned slightly, ensuring the man could read his lips. You're just in time, El Severo, Diego said. The men tensed, their anticipation sharpening. Rip realized El Severo would determine his fate, ally or outcast. Nora froze under El Severo's predatory gaze. Noah, pale and drained, sank into a chair. El Severo's cold, glittering eyes bored into Rip, sizing him up. The man's thick shoulders and scarred hands exuded brutal power. 7 knives hung from his belt, hinting at his preferred methods. Rip held his ground, knowing hesitation meant weakness. El Severo shifted his attention to Nora. He stepped forward, gripped her arm, and pressed his fingers into her flesh, leaving pink marks before letting go. Nora flinched but held still, remembering this man could ruin her plans to save Noah. She forced herself to stay still and appear calm. El Severo bared his yellow broken teeth in a grotesque grin. He moved his lips silently, emitting faint hisses and whispers. "Say that again," Diego ordered. "I didn't catch it." Rip noticed both men reading lips. El Severo formed the words without sound, but Diego understood him perfectly. El Severo repeated the motion, and Diego smiled. "He says you'll do, Nora. You can stay with us." Diego swept off his hat and bowed theatrically. Calico Hole now has the most beautiful outlaw in the Southwest. "I'm here to care for Noah," Nora replied firmly. El Severo studied her lips and noted the rapid pulse in her throat. He recognized her fear, but also saw her resolve. She would endure anything for her brother. Rip had focused on Diego until El Severo entered, commanding attention through sheer presence. Rip now scrutinized the outlaw leader's appearance and movements. Diego, part white and part Apache, carried himself with a mix of grace and menace. His lean, wolfish body moved with unsettling ease, and his darting black eyes constantly scanned for threats. His pale skin had the hue of milk mixed with ink, and his cruelty fueled the rumors surrounding his heritage. Educated in a government school, Diego combined white man's knowledge with Apache cunning to lead raids on cattle, banks, and trains. Diego nodded toward Noah. "Take your sister to the second cabin. El Severo doesn't like your friend, and what happens next might not suit a lady's eyes." "He got me out of jail," Noah said quietly. "He risked his life to do it." Noah glanced at Rip, who stood tall and unflinching. "Don't worry about him, Diego. He doesn't back down. I've seen him under fire." Diego smirked. "True, some men don't show fear. Texas Rangers, for instance. I've watched 3 die." He gestured toward the graves on the slope. "But we wouldn't want Rangers in our outfit." His face hardened. "Take your sister and go." "All right," Noah muttered and turned to Nora. "Diego gave us the second cabin. I think I'll turn in. I'm sick." As Nora led her brother away, El Severo stepped closer to Rip, stopping 2 feet away. His face twisted in a snarl, and his lips silently formed the unmistakable word, "Ranger." "Don't be so sure," Rip shot back, forming the words silently. "You might be wrong, and if you are, you'll lose face with Diego. You can't afford that." El Severo's scowl deepened. He turned to Diego, his lips moving in a flurry that Rip couldn't follow. Diego nodded. "That settles it, Temple," Diego said coldly. "You die." "All right, boys." The outlaws surrounded Rip with grim expressions. One of them grabbed his arm. "We take prisoners to the grave on the hoof," he sneered. "No fancy wagons or white horses for you." Nora emerged from the cabin, her voice cutting through the tension. "What's going on? Don't they believe you, Mr. Campbell?" Rip smiled calmly. "Nothing to worry about. We're just talking things over. Tell Noah it's a matter of proving I'm not Jesse Temple, just a gentleman adventurer." Nora studied him briefly. No man facing death could appear so casual. Satisfied, she returned to the cabin. Diego's roving eyes fixed on Rip. If the young man felt fear, he gave no sign. "Take him to the cemetery," Diego ordered. The men escorted Rip down a trail partially concealed by brush and trees. Their high-heeled boots crunched the dirt as they walked stiffly. They exchanged few words, each sensing something unusual about Rip. His cold demeanor mirrored Diego's own, but lacked the outlaw leader's restless energy. Some wondered if he truly was Temple, but most dismissed the idea. No ranger would willingly walk into Calico Hole. Without Temple's name in play, this calm young man might have already earned a place among them. The gravel shifted under their boots, disturbed by each step. Crunch. Crunch. Rip thought. Death. Death. The sound echoed his fate. It hit him. These men believed he was about to die. Their muted excitement was tempered only by their curiosity about his calm demeanor. Rip had faced death before, but always in action, gunfights or fistfights where there was no time to dwell on mortality. Now walking this trail, death. Death pounded in his mind. They turned onto a narrow path, walking single file toward the slope. Rip realized he would die without a chance to fight back. If he raised a hand, they would react instantly, bullets tearing through his body. A tremor ran through him. His face shifted, color drained as though his heart had stopped. El Severo watched him closely, then informed Diego, "He's afraid. He's yellow. Soon he'll talk." Diego nodded, satisfied. He couldn't appear uncertain, especially in front of his men or El Severo. To maintain power, Diego had to always be right, and El Severo shared that belief. Their authority depended on their infallibility. Outsmarting them would require wits more than bullets. At the edge of a hole meant to serve as his grave, the group stopped. The pit measured 4 feet wide, 10 feet deep, with a layer of rocks and sand at the bottom. "Get in," Diego ordered. Rip jumped to the bottom as Diego tossed him a shovel. "Clear out the loose dirt." The men gathered around, peering into the grave, their grins lit with curiosity as Rip worked. Sand and small rocks flew out until he reached solid ground. "Come out now," Diego commanded, tossing down a short rope. Rip gripped the rope and hauled himself out. "Make your dying statement," Diego said. Rip brushed off his hands. "Never mind how I got started. And no, Rip Campbell isn't my real name. Who here's using their real name anyway? Now listen. I spent time in Yuma prison. After a jailbreak, I drifted to New Mexico, where I joined the Madra bank robbery. 4 men died, shot by the cashier," Diego cut in. "One got away," Rip replied smoothly. "That was me. Afterward, I heard about the bank at Wagon Gap. Plenty of money there, so I started planning. Thought I'd give it a shot solo. If it didn't work, I'd join you. Picked the wrong plan, though. Didn't expect a mob to follow me. Got $50,000, but couldn't hold on to it. They jailed me, and you know the rest. I sawed my way out and brought Noah Ford with me. He was dying." "You're a liar," Diego snarled. "You can look a man in the eye and lie. You're Temple, and you're going to die." Diego signaled El Severo, who knocked Rip to his knees. Drawing his .45, Diego positioned his thumb on the trigger. The hammer crept back, tension crackling in the air. Rip moved his lips silently, knowing Diego would understand. "Go ahead. Finish it. Then watch time prove you never buried Jesse Temple, like you claimed." His lips curled into a sneer. "And I thought you and El Severo were smart." Diego's thumb trembled. Slowly, he released the hammer. Rip didn't flinch, as a collective sigh rippled through the group. "If I was only sure," Diego muttered. "If I was only sure." He glanced at El Severo. "What do you think?" Rip seized the moment. "He's already told you I'm Temple. That settles it." "It does," Diego snapped. He kicked Rip into the grave. Rip landed hard but stood, bracing for whatever came next. "This one dies differently," Diego growled. "Bury him alive." El Severo nodded, his eyes glinting with approval. Chapter 4. The men gathered around the grave, shovels in hand, and began tossing dirt in. It came down in a steady stream from all sides, the dust nearly choking him. Rip threw his arm across his face, cursing the outlaw for his foolishness, until the dust sent him into a fit of coughing. The dirt piled higher, reaching his knees, then his thighs, and finally his waist. "Stop," Diego ordered. He peered down curiously, watching as the dust settled. "Ready to talk?" he asked. "Not with you, Diego," Rip replied. "I'd heard stories about you and El Severo. I thought you were better than the average," Rip continued. "I figured you were smart enough to tell the difference between a ranger and a man just trying to make an honest living. Well, I'm paying for my mistake with my life." Diego's face hardened. Then Rip heard Noah's voice, coughing from the effort of running. Noah almost threw himself at Diego. "You can't do it, Diego," he panted. "He saved my life." Diego's fingers clenched. His arms half lifted, as if to throttle Noah for his impudence. Perhaps Diego had been looking for a way out. Maybe he believed Rip wasn't a ranger, but just a man who could handle a gun and help himself to bank funds. As he saw Noah Ford, something changed in Diego's expression. It was as though an opportunity had emerged. "You want to live, Campbell?" Diego asked. "You'd like to join my band, yeah?" "I'd like to live," Rip snapped. "But I'm not so sure about joining your outfit after what just happened." Diego's face flushed. He felt defensive. "The bank at Wagon Gap has never been robbed. You and your men pick up a few dollars and get caught. Bring me $50,000 from Wagon Gap, and you can join us." "And you'll go along with me?" Rip countered. Diego shook his head. "You play your lone hand game and show me how good you are, my friend. If you don't come back, then I'll kill Noah Ford." "Right, Noah." "He'll come back with the loot," Noah declared confidently. "Or," he hesitated, "or he'll die in his tracks." "Yes, I hadn't thought of that. There'll be 100 men covering the trail." "But your friend is smart." Diego sneered. "He has plans that will succeed." "Sure, but I need time, and I'll do it my way," Rip declared. "This means life or death for me." "And for your friend, Noah Ford," Diego suggested softly. Rip glanced at El Severo. The man had made his claim, calling Rip by the name of Jesse Temple and trying to force him into the outlaw's challenge. Rip's sneers had made El Severo rethink his conclusion, and now he was glad to let Diego take the lead. Two men dropped into the grave and helped Rip out. He shook the dirt from his clothing and wiped his face. "Let's get this straight," Rip said. "I'm to rob the Wagon Gap Bank of at least $50,000 and bring it back here. If I double-cross you, Noah dies." "Yes," Diego replied. "And if Noah doesn't return, then, we have a beautiful, what's the word? Yes. We have a beautiful hostage who came here of her own accord." Rip gritted his teeth, stifling his anger. Diego was making an impossible bargain. He could have just taken Rip's word and left Noah and Nora Ford out of it. Was there no honor among thieves? Apparently not. Diego's smooth, oily voice interrupted his thoughts. "Tonight you'll tell me your plan for doing what has never been done, taking $50,000 from the Wagon Gap Bank." Nora Ford entered the scene, walking toward her brother. "You shouldn't have gotten out of bed, Noah," she scolded. "I'm trying to get you back on your feet. You mustn't worry. Eat well and rest." "There's plenty to worry about," Noah grumbled. "And still plenty more." "No," Rip said, smiling at Nora. "Everything has been settled." The outlaws were separating, heading back to their cabins, and the three were alone. Nora shook her head. No, nothing is settled until the slate is clean, Noah, and we're on a ranch somewhere. Her eyes flashed accusingly at Rip Campbell. He'd have gone too, if you had led the way. The posse was too close, Noah protested. Nonsense, Nora retorted. He had already refused to run and start fresh, and you agreed to stick with him. He'd have joined Diego. Look where we are now. The sparkle in Nora's eyes faded, replaced by a wistful smile. I'm forgetting you saved his life when you helped him escape from Beasley's cell, she said. I do appreciate that. But don't you see? Noah's just a kid, and his loyalty is making him stick by you. He's giving up the ranch we worked so hard to build, giving up Molly Geary, everything. I'm sorry, Rip muttered. But I'm following my own path. Noah, I wish you'd forget about me. Not in 1,000 years, Noah said quietly. He couldn't erase the memory of the damp cell where he'd been dying by inches. Now, he breathed the free air that Rip had helped him reach. Silence fell. Noah stared at the half-filled grave, shuddering. Rip had moved past it, focused on the future. But Nora couldn't stop watching Rip. Her woman's intuition was tugging at her, unsure whether it offered consolation or a warning. She was thinking that Rip's courage was greater than she had ever seen. The outlaws had left, and Diego and El Severo walked up the trail, scowling and uncertain. They acted like men on the defensive, despite the impossible bargain Diego had struck. I wish I understood you, Rip Campbell, she said presently. Perhaps if I knew the measure of your courage. That wouldn't help you, he said gently. Courage has neither weight nor bulk. It can't be measured. So, what is it? I don't know, but you have more than I ever hoped to possess, he went on. No all women share it. You came, unafraid, into Calico Hole, knowing you could never leave without Diego's permission. You came because you love your brother. If you're thinking I showed courage because I snapped back at Diego, well, forget it. I had nothing to lose, so why not convince him I came to join his band? A coyote will fight if cornered. You're not changing my opinion, Mr. Campbell, she calmly informed him. Something about you has eluded me from the first, but I've got it now. You're being driven on by some tremendous purpose, and nothing can stop you. You may not succeed, but it won't be because you haven't risked everything to gain your ends. If you'll risk your life, then you'll risk Noah's and mine, everyone's. Ah, come now, he protested. You're making me a sort of angel one moment, and a devil the next. We seem to have the run of the whole. As long as we don't attempt to leave, let's have a look around. Rip Campbell, she said sharply. You are trying to drag a red herring across the trail. Well, it won't succeed. I won't be thrown off the scent in any such casual manner. And he saw that she was downright angry. He walked slowly toward the graves, mentally trying to decide which was worse, an outlaw with suspicions or a girl with suspicions. I'm going to have the last word, he said over his shoulder and grinned. Innocent men have been hanged because somebody jumped to conclusions or was loose with words. And that, Rip Campbell, is the red herring again, she answered. But we'll let it go for the present. Rip, tired, started for his cabin, but Nora, after a moment's doubt, decided to stay with him and examine him further. She didn't want to make a fool of herself, nor did she care to miss anything that might point to danger for her brother. Rip walked along, reading the names on the headboards Diego had erected. They stood, however, as monuments of his personal achievement rather than marks of respect to the dead. Dred Morton, Rip read. Sheriff, Mike Sanders, Sheriff, Don Remp, Texas Ranger, Slim Temple, Texas Ranger. He paused, stared, and turned to the girl. So Jesse Temple's kid brother Slim was killed by Diego, yea, he cried. That was the rumor, but hardly anybody believed it. Jesse Temple knew it, Nora Ford answered. Diego sent Temple Slim's last letter and a sketch of the grave. And Jesse went on a vacation. Noel, the Temple courage is buried in that grave, I guess. Come, let's get out of here. Forget strife, murder, and graves. Let's please find something beautiful and sweet in life, if only for an hour. You're right, he agreed. Let's walk around the hole. I see some mighty fine saddle stock in that east pasture. Away from the slope and its graves, away, too, from Diego and the sinister El Severo, the hole lost much of its menace. It took on its real purpose in the scheme of things, an area several miles square protected from violent storms, offering a rock fence 1,000 feet high to enclose cattle. The soil was black loam several feet deep, and it was almost possible to hear the grass and vegetables growing when the sun shone. In the winter time, the girl was saying, those crests are covered with snow. I know, because I've seen them from the other side. And when a blizzard strikes, the cattle can't run miles and miles, to fall exhausted and freeze to death. What a grand place for a ranch. It's nicer even than our place at Calico Springs. I could do a lot with this, he said half to himself, but she heard him. Then you've not been an outlaw all of your life, she cried in triumph. His past life and his present purpose kept intruding. No, he answered. I could make a ranch of this, and I'd like to do it. This would be the home ranch, and the cattle could be driven in off the range and fattened here. His face softened when he saw the horses galloping across the field with tails and manes flying, the whites of their eyes showing in pretended fear. In an instant, he had changed from a hard-featured individual planning a bank robbery under desperate conditions to a rancher who dreamed of building instead of destroying. The mood lingered and deepened as they walked onto the crystal stream and followed it to the falls. The drop broke up the water, and it fluttered to a rocky basin in billows like wind-blown lace. Everything within 100 yards of the spot was moist. Ferns grew from the rocks where roots had lodged in the cracks, and trout lay in rows where the stream left the basin. The spell could not last, as Calico Hole was given to violence, not beauty. Diego, followed as usual by El Severo, came from a nearby thicket and joined them. He bowed with exaggerated politeness at Nora and said, "You will pardon me, but business first." "Of course," she responded and walked away. Rip decided he was in for another difficult period, reasoning the two had had an opportunity to think over the situation and discuss it from various angles. "You've got a nice setup here, Diego," he said. "Perfect. An army could not take Calico Hole," Diego answered, swelling with pride. "I was looking over the graves," Rip said. "I didn't know you'd killed Slim Temple." "Yes, with my own hands, hoping his brother would come to avenge his death." He shrugged his shoulders and rolled his eyes back. "Noah's for the plans and hopes of man," he said. Then his mood changed with the swiftness of a striking snake. "I can't wait. I must hear of your plan to rob the Wagon Gap Bank now." Rip Campbell was thinking that this man could shake your hand, then knife you while he smiled into your eyes. As long as he was a part of Diego's outfit, he would never know what to expect. "Noahhood," he said. "This is the only way it can be done, Diego. We've got to consider, first, the bank. Next, getting rid of the 100 or more manhunters that'll hunt me down. Now, what do you think of this?" Unconsciously, he lowered his voice. He talked eagerly for perhaps 5 minutes while first surprise, then something approaching admiration came into the outlaw's black eyes. Even El Severo nodded. "And I'll need some gold nuggets," Rip concluded. Chapter 5. Diego and El Severo, having trailed Rip and Nora and observed their conversation, now seemed willing to disregard the man's presence, at least for the moment. They walked down to the fence to look at the horses, then returned to the large log cabin reserved for them. Rip followed the stream, wishing he had a hook and line, while mentally planning how a water wheel could be harnessed to churn milk and cut fodder. He paused at the fence, studying the horses. They watched him in mock alarm. Then suddenly one whinnied joyfully and galloped toward him. She was a pert little black mare with a star on her forehead. Her legs were slender, and she carried herself with a pleasing arrogance. Eagerness filled her eyes as she curved her glistening neck to look at him, a sight sure to stir the blood of any horse lover. "Ah," Rip whispered, but when the mare nudged his pocket, his manner changed. Someone was watching. He thrust his elbow against the mare's delicate nose, causing her to rear back in surprise and pain. "Get out," he hissed. "I don't have anything for you." The brush crackled, but Rip didn't look around, though a nervous tension was evident in his eyes. "I saw that," Nora called. "I was coming through this thicket to join you when the mare approached. She recognized you, and then, when she heard me, you struck her." "Why?" She answered her own question. "It's because if Diego finds out the mare knows you, he may trace your past through her." "Miss Ford," Rip said, "if you don't stop imagining things, and worse, talking about them, you're going to get me into trouble." She flushed, angry. "I don't talk, but I'm going to ask some questions about that mare," she declared. It sounded like a challenge. "I don't care about a bunch of wanted men, you included. But I'll stop at nothing to protect my brother. You helped him escape, and we're grateful for that. I've said it before. But he's not going to get any deeper into this. If some wanted man gets hurt to keep him out of trouble, I won't shed any tears." "That's the attitude to take," Rip replied. "I won't quarrel with you. Stick close to your brother, and don't do anything that'll bring grief down on my head, and we'll be good friends." "We'll leave it that way," she said, her tone less hostile. "Now, for the second time, let's try to enjoy the beauty of this place." "Good. What a sweet friend you'd make, and what a remorseless enemy," he grinned. She was a little spitfire, and he knew he could enjoy her company. The day passed quickly, with Rip and Nora exploring their surroundings while Noah rested in the sun, his abused body slowly recovering. The members of the outlaw band cast admiring glances at Nora, but none attempted to engage with her. Rip concluded that Diego had likely set clear rules for his gang. One girl in an outlaw camp could cause trouble, several might spark a civil war. They ate together at a long table set on the porch. Diego sat at the head, with El Severo to his right. Rip and Nora took places at the far end, while Noah occupied his usual seat. Little was said during the meal. Large dishes of food were passed from hand to hand, and when hands were too full to pass a dish, forks darted out, stabbing at the meat or potatoes and carrying them to their owners. Coffee was gulped down quickly, and food was devoured. They ate and drank like men, expecting an interruption at any moment, the unmistakable mark of wanted men. Nora, watching Rip out of the corner of her eye, noted that he ate as hurriedly as the rest. After the evening meal, the men rolled cigarettes and smoked slowly, but their eyes remained alert, ever watchful. Noah went to bed at 8, and Nora followed at 9. She slept in the bunk below him, ready to attend to his needs. Rip was assigned a bunk in the adobe house with the other men. He was the first to rise the next morning, apart from the cook. Others appeared soon after, yawning and grumbling as the sunlight streamed in through the calico walls. Noah didn't show up for breakfast, but Nora hurried in, gathering a soft-boiled egg, some toast, and a glass of milk for him. "I don't know what that poor boy went through in that jail," she said, "but he was yelling a dozen times last night." "I've got an idea," Rip said. "A few hours was enough for me." "I heard there's something off about Beasley's setup down in Wagon Gap," one man remarked. "They say the Texas Rangers are looking into it, but I don't know. Probably just talk. A yellow dog gets better than what Beasley gives some white men down there," another added. Nora left, only to return a moment later. She ate without enthusiasm. The others left the table to begin a card game that would last all day. Noon brought an excited man, just as the cook sounded the dinner bell. "The black mare with the white star is gone," he shouted. "What's that?" Diego demanded, scowling at Rip Campbell. Nora's eyes were on him too. Rip shifted uncomfortably. "Well, don't look at me," he complained. "I wasn't out of bed all night, and there are plenty of the boys who can prove it." Several men confirmed this statement. Diego stared at each man in turn, then turned back to Rip. "No horses took it into their heads to leave before you came," the outlaw leader said. "Looks bad for you." "Your men are light sleepers," Rip retorted. "Every time I turned over, someone woke up and looked at me. A fine chance I'd have had to sneak out and steal a horse without someone hearing." "She couldn't get through the barbed wire down at the entrance," Diego said thoughtfully, "so she must have had help." "That mare could," one man argued. "She's the smartest little trick we ever put a rope on." With that, the subject dropped. "Rip, you look like a sheep herder," Nora remarked, finding him with a heavy black stubble on his face by the third day. "Can't you borrow a razor?" "I'm afraid not," Rip explained. "I'm growing a beard, for important reasons. I've got 2 months to do it." "Part of your plan to rob the Wagon Gap Bank, I suppose?" she asked. "Yes, but only part. The plan's complicated, but it must succeed," he said. "I think you'd risk life and fortune on the turn of a card," she said bluntly. "I've done so," he answered. "I'll do so again. It's not hard if you draw the card." From that moment, Nora Ford's tactics changed. She no longer argued with Rip or tried to trick him into admitting the plan she suspected he was following. Instead, she worked to win his confidence. She moved slowly, drifting into friendship in the days that followed, but listening intently to everything he said, trying to piece things together, though with little success. During that first week, it looked as though Nora's brother might steadily worsen. The reaction to his escape had been intense, and his condition took a critical turn. Noah talked of death constantly, thanking Rip again and again. He regretted not being able to accompany Rip when he raided the bank. "I'd like to show you what you mean to me," he whispered. "I'd like to stand behind you and back your play." Rip, watching at Noah's side while Nora cried softly into her handkerchief, laughed and assured the sick man that the debt between them was squared. "If you owe me anything, Noah," he said, "if you really feel that way about it, shake off this morbid streak and get well. You're an eagle, you know, and you're back among the peaks. That should answer everything." "You're not lying to me?" Noah asked eagerly. "I've got a chance." "If I didn't think you were going to get well, Noah," Rip lied, "I'd be running around trying to do something about it. I didn't get you out of jail just to attend your funeral. Now, confound you, turn over and go to sleep." He grinned and walked away. Nora followed Rip outside. "He's breathing so hard and can't seem to rest," she sobbed. "You deceived him, bless you, but you didn't deceive me. I saw the muscles in your face work as you talked to him." "I guess you did, Nora," he admitted. "One of my kid brothers is dead, and I'm pretty soft where youngsters are concerned. My father died when I was 12, and the children, 2 boys and 2 girls younger than I, looked to me for food and later advice. They looked on me at times as a very old man." He threw his arm across her shoulder, and she pressed her eyes against his shirt for several wretched seconds. "I'm better now. By morning we should know, one way or the other." "Yes, one way or the other," he said. At 5 o'clock, Nora came to the adobe and called him, though he had stayed by Noah's side until 3. "He's hardly breathing," she explained. "And I don't want to be there alone." Rip dressed quickly and hurried over. He looked down briefly, then whispered, "Go to bed and sleep yourself. He's enjoying the first normal rest he's had in months." Improvement from that hour was gradual. Noah's appetite had to be monitored to prevent a setback. He walked about the camp, gradually increasing the distance. Then he rode, grinning boyishly from a saddle that had carried more than one outlaw through a successful raid. By the 4th week, The three of them woke to find the cabins unusually quiet. The cook had set only 7 places at the long table, and 4 of those were occupied by members of the band. They were on edge that morning, and it was clear they were also on guard against Rip Campbell. "The others are away on business," one man said gruffly. Diego said nobody's to leave camp. No riding around, looking at the scenery. When they were alone, Noah explained, "Nobody but Diego knows when they're going raiding. You'll be asleep, and somebody wakes you up and says, 'Get up, we're riding tonight.' We dress, go out, saddle, and Diego leads off, with El Severo bringing up the rear." "El Severo rides behind, yeah?" Rip asked. "Sure. Just in case someone tries to take a shot at Diego from behind. There's $10,000 on his head, you know. El Severo's the only one Diego really trusts," Noah said. "When'll they be back?" Rip asked. "It's hard to tell," Noah replied. "What's to prevent the Rangers from waiting for them at the entrance?" Rip inquired. "I hope to be a part of this outfit someday, and I'd like to know where I'll meet danger, and what measures are taken for a man's protection. Diego has plenty of friends who'll let him know when strange faces appear," Noah replied. "Friends?" Rip's eyes narrowed. "Well, maybe not friends, but people who have a healthy respect for the peculiar forms Diego's revenge takes when someone informs on him," Nora said. The day and night passed without incident, save for an increasing nervousness among the outlaws remaining in the hole. The next afternoon, the band returned, Diego in the lead, El Severo bringing up the rear, and a wounded man swaying in the saddle. Those who stayed behind sprang into action, first taking the wounded man to a bunk, then caring for the horses. The animals, ridden until they were ready to drop, were caked with dust and dried lather. One bore a nasty crease where a bullet had struck its shoulder. Flies were already buzzing around the wound. "I'll fix up this nag," Rip volunteered. "Go ahead," an outlaw agreed. "We've got to dig a slug out of Joe's back." The horse winced under Rip's ministrations, and Joe bellowed with pain as his companions applied rough surgery. Through it all, Diego paced the piazza with tigerish strides, striving to relax after the long, tense hours. El Severo, of different stuff, sat calmly in a chair and smoked. A sort of peace settled on the group by evening. The meal was late, the cook wisely waiting until the men had relaxed. Good wine before the meal mellowed their hardness slightly, and conversation grew brisk. One man laughed suddenly. "I'll never forget the look on that cashier's face when I told him we were the Diego band. Sweat came out on his face, and he shook all over. I let him have it. He knew he was going to die, and he looked like somebody whose feelings were hurt. He roared with laughter. His hands were clawing at the ceiling, and he was yelling his head off. But the funniest was that deputy sheriff," a second man said. "He had a bead on me, and was about to pull the trigger when Diego stuck his gun over the wall and let him have it. Smack. The bullet got him in the stomach, and he grabbed himself and danced a jig, then fell headfirst into the dirt, his head butting round on the ground, and his feet still dancing up and down. Ha! 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 Laughter ran around the table. That was his wife who came yelling out of the house, the first man said. Never knew a woman could yell like that. Nora dropped her knife and fork and left the table. More laughter followed. Too much for the gal, someone remarked. Noah finished his meal and followed Nora. There'll be a big drunk tonight, he explained. They got $10,000 and are feeling good. Noah, how can you throw in with such a crowd? The girl asked in a wretched voice. And you, Rip, you laughed with them. I threw in with them to get some of our cattle two-spot Delaney had branded, and now I'm in with them up to my ears, Noah answered. We'd better hide out, he went on in a low voice, until this celebration's over. If Rip's underfoot, somebody's liable to call him Jesse Temple or Beasley in disguise. And if they see you, Nora, somebody'll want to start a dance, and that'll start a fight." The three withdrew to the brush and spent the night listening to the brawling. Of those involved, only El Severo remained sober. Diego drank alone in his room, brooding, building up wrongs real and fancied, and promising revenge in diabolical forms. It was dawn before the men fell asleep, and the three returned to get a little rest of their own. There were no more raids, Diego deciding to lay low and let things quiet down, giving Rip his chance at the Wagon Gap Bank. 2 months from the day Rip entered the hole, Diego sent for him. On the table lay placer gold worth $2,000. "The time's come for you to get that $50,000 in the bank," he explained. "Your beard has grown out, and here's the gold you needed. You know what'll happen to Noah Ford if you don't come back." Rip nodded. "I think Noah will try to stick with me. He thinks I'm tackling an impossible job. He's got the idea he owes me something." "Yes. You are tackling an impossible job," Diego said unpleasantly. "It was your bluff, and I called it. I hold the cards, as usual. The men are betting 10-1 you won't get away with it." He smiled. "They're betting 50-1 you'll be glad to get out and leave Noah holding the sack. I hope you do, my friend. I'm about ready to settle down and enjoy the profits of my labors. I know a place across the Mexican border where a man could spend his days." "Yes. Yes. And the Bible says it is not good for man to live alone. I've done Nora Ford the honor of asking her to become my wife. She refused." His face grew wolfish. "Refused because of my Indian blood. Well, if you don't come back and Noah faces death at my hands, the lady might listen to reason. She might be persuaded to change her mind." "You've done a little figuring ahead, Diego," Rip answered. "Well, so have I. The lady doesn't figure in the plan, nor Noah. You've laid up a snug fortune for your old age. I won't last forever in this life, so I'm robbing Wagon Gap as agreed and throwing in with you. I'll leave tomorrow night." "Good. Tomorrow night." Diego smacked his lips with satisfaction. Again, he was figuring ahead. "I've done everything possible to help you, my friend," he added softly. "I and my men have stayed at home, so the people won't be watchful." "Thanks for being fair about it," Rip replied. He sauntered away, and Diego sent for Miguel, one of his followers who, like himself, had Apache blood. Miguel entered the room and seated himself. Diego poured him a drink, and Miguel knew what was coming. "You will go down and tell our friend, our good friend in Wagon Gap, a prospector will come with gold nuggets. He plans to leave with gold coin from the bank. Our good friend will know what to do when he hears this prospector is Rip Campbell." Miguel smiled, finished his drink, and left the room. Diego knew the job was as good as done. The outlaw leader drew deeply on his cigarette. "Rip's plan is good, so good I shall try it myself sometime." Again, he drew deeply on the cigarette and watched the smoke drift away. Things were going along in a highly satisfactory manner. Chapter 6. Rip Campbell was ready to start at daybreak. The outlaws slumbered, but he saw a light in Nora's cabin, and presently the girl came through the gray shadows of dawn. "I want to talk to you," she said. "Noahone, over here where the walls haven't ears." She led the way to a thicket. Something in her face caused his pulse to quicken. They had grown close in the last few weeks. Noah could not forget that Rip had freed him from Beasley's cell and took care of him when the pursuit got hot. Nora could not forget that Rip had stood over her brother when he was at death's crossroads, laughed at the thought of his dying, and so filled the youth with confidence that he renewed the fight and was now well. "Rip, must you go?" she asked. "Does it mean so much to you, Nora?" he countered, looking down into her serious face. "I mean my angle, not nose," he explained. "You know it does, Rip," she said quietly. He drew a deep breath, as if the problems that lay ahead were difficult. "I think the time has come," he said slowly, "to tell you that I love you." He turned her chin up and smiled into her eyes. "Nora, you are loyal, sweet, and courageous. I like you here in Calico Hole, with the mighty walls, the falls, the rich bottomland, and the cattle. It is a picture, this." He swept his hand over a land awakening. "And you complete it. I love you, Rip. If you could only remain the Rip I love, and not be a predatory, wolfish creature lusting for blood some of the time, we could be happy." She looked gravely about. "But I can see nothing ahead but heartache." "Things have a way of working themselves out," he answered. "You've got something else on your mind." It was a statement, not a query. "Yes, Rip, I have. I can't shake off the conviction you are hewing to a line, and that you don't care much where the chips fall," she went on hurriedly. "To gain your ends, you'll sacrifice your own life." "Why shouldn't a man sacrifice everything to gain an end?" he argued. "But it's not fair, not just for you to sacrifice my brother. Oh, Rip. He's all I've got. He's determined to stick with you. It all goes back to the living death he endured under Beasley. You saved him, and now he feels he should give up everything in return. It means he will trail you to Wagon Gap and follow you on future raids with Diego's band if you succeed and become a member. It means hanging or violent death in the long run. Now, Rip, I put it squarely up to you. Does anything justify that?" "No, from your standpoint, yes, from mine. I'm going ahead." "No's got to use some sense," he grimly declared. "And I want him to keep out of it. I'll tell Diego to stop him from following me." Rip started to go, but the girl, in a frenzy of fear, flung herself into his arms. "I can't let you go, Rip," she sobbed. "Oh, I love you so much. You can be so gentle and fine. Let's develop that and fight off the wolf streak together. I'll go anywhere with you, shoot our way out of this place with you, if you'll only let me help you, Rip." Her outburst shook him. She felt him tremble from head to foot, and his arms tightened, then relaxed. "No," he answered, "it's too late for me to turn back now. I'm going ahead." "Then if you're going to the devil, Rip Campbell, I'll go along with you. I don't care what becomes of me now. A day's happiness, or a week's, it doesn't matter, just so I get it. I'm going." Rip's instincts warned him to watch the pair. His eyes read the girl's lips. He came over, caught her arm, and with a jerk of his huge head ordered Rip to go. She struggled desperately, but El Severo held her helpless. Rip walked over to the 3 burros he had saddled for his expedition. He mounted one and drove the other 2 ahead of him. He did not look back, but swung toward the big cabin. Diego was standing before an open window. "Don't let Noah follow," Rip requested. "No, I won't let him follow," Diego replied. "Adios." "Slong," Rip answered. Slowly, he rode down the trail, past the slope with its gruesome letters, then through the barbed wire, and on to Calico Springs. The sun was up when he stopped at the Twin F Ranch. The Indian woman who had served Nora so long was sitting on the steps, silent and dejected. He wondered if she would recognize him, so he said, "Hello. Where's everybody?" She pointed toward the entrance to Calico Hole, then back to a notice on the front door. Rip read the copy of a lengthy legal document tacked to the panel. The import was plain. The man holding the mortgage had declared the ranch abandoned and to protect his interest had foreclosed. Beasley had bought the place at a forced sale. And you can bet he got it for a song, Rip reflected. That poor squaw doesn't know what to do either. I suppose she figured this would be her home as long as she lived. He prodded the burros into action. El Severo came from a tangle and continued on toward Wagon Gap, some 30 miles away. Rip stopped near the Geary Ranch that afternoon and watered the burros. Molly came down to the fence and watched him. She was thin and dispirited and said nothing. A burly man, hard at work, Rip concluded was Chris Geary, her father. Rip made camp and arrived on the outskirts of Wagon Gap late the next afternoon. Dusk was falling when he entered the town, and this suited his purpose. He put the burros up in an empty barn behind the bank, then spread his blankets on the bunk of an abandoned cabin. The throb of life came faintly from the main street. He opened the stove and brought out a quantity of gray wood ashes, which he rubbed thoroughly in his hair and beard. Unless one examined him too closely, he could pass in the dusk for a gray-headed man. Not so bad, he mused, examining his features in a cracked mirror. He was building a fire in the stove when the door opened suddenly. Diego had equipped him with a pair of old .45s, and instinctively his hands dropped to the butts of the untried guns. "Don't shoot, Rip, it's Noah." The door closed, and Noah Ford stood there, smiling and confident. "Diego let me come after I talked him into it," he hastily explained. "Don't get mad now. This is too big for any one man to tackle alone." "No, all right," Rip answered briefly. "But suppose you're recognized? I've got to take that chance. Now here's what's happened. Beasley, for no reason I can figure out, is headed this way. It's no chance stroll," Noah went on hurriedly. "I've seen him walk too many times not to know when he means business. What do you want me to do?" "I'll meet him," Rip answered. He hastily examined his weapons. The cartridges were new, and the guns appeared to work smoothly. He stepped outside. It was light enough to see 100 yards away, but beyond that it was indistinct. A deadly calm possessed Rip as he walked up the alley, and his mind groped for an answer to Beasley's sudden decision to come directly to him. "It's no hunch he's following," he told himself. "It's a hot tip from somebody. If I can't shut him up without a gunfight, I won't have much chance to clean out the bank. There he is." Beasley carried a .45 in his right hand. His left rested lightly on the butt of a second weapon. Rip walked stiffly, head slightly bent, hoping to carry out his role of an old prospector. 100 feet separated them, then Beasley's hand came up. "Stick them up," he snarled. "I know you." Rip's gun leapt, and flames stabbed into the dusk. The roar of the weapon silenced Beasley's words. Dust spurted from the front and back of his shirt, then he pitched forward. Though the man had had Rip covered, the latter had drawn and fired before Beasley's brain could catch the movement and telegraph the order to pull the trigger. His gun remained silent. "You got him, Rip," Noah cried. "Better light out. The whole town will be here in a minute." "Listen, Noah, I came here to rob a bank." Rip's fingers grasped Noah's arm. "You've made a lot of cracks about what you'd do for me. You said you'd die if need be, and that's the right spirit. You've a chance to prove it. Take my gun." He pressed the warm weapon into Noah Ford's hands, then yanked one of Ford's guns from the holster and thrust it into his own. "Stand up to it. Tell any yarn you want to, Noah, and leave it to me to get you out of this. Savvy?" "Yes," Noah Ford answered in bewilderment. People were running, and before he could offer further comment, Rip had slunk into the shadows and was making his way to the cabin. A ring of guns hemmed Noah in a moment later. Unfriendly eyes peered into his face. "Say," a man shouted. "This is Noah Ford, one of Diego's gang. By gosh, he came here to get Beasley, and he got him." "JJ came here for medicine," Noah said uncertainly. "My sister's sick. Beasley got the drop on me. I told him I'd quit, but he said he'd fix me so I couldn't get away again. I knew he was going to shoot. He could call it self-defense and get himself in the clear. Nobody would believe me, so I beat him to it." "Nobody believes you now," a voice bellowed. "String him up, boys. Up with him." "Just a minute," a shaky voice objected. "It won't look so good, boys, for us to take the law into our own hands." Rip Campbell, bent and apparently feeble, was trying to make himself heard. "Who are you?" someone demanded. "Just old High Manning, but I know how things like this turn out," Rip said. His words had no influence except to delay matters, but the delay proved sufficient. A brisk individual, wearing a deputy sheriff's shield, pushed his way through. "So you killed Beasley, eh?" The deputy peered closer. "Noah Ford. I wouldn't have known you." "I look different," Noah said. "I've been out in the fresh air and sun. It looks like a case of revenge. You'll swing sure for this." The deputy snapped handcuffs around Noah's wrists. "Come on. Back to the damp cell again, yeah?" Noah said bitterly. "No, not this time. The Texas Rangers have that business under fire. We're expecting a man any time to show up and ask questions about prisoners who died awaiting trial." He hurried Noah along. "I never favored such treatment for an outlaw, anyway. Arrest them, try them, hang them, that's my motto. But Beasley and his crowd run the country, and I had nothing to say about it." Noah recognized him as a deputy who was kept on the fringe of the county most of the time. He appeared to have plenty of the stuff a Western peace officer needs. Noah was hurried into an upper cell, where there was plenty of fresh air and a fine view of the wall and guards. An hour later, the prosecuting attorney appeared to ask questions and briefly discuss the matter with the deputy. "We'll make a record for speed in this case," the prosecutor said tersely. "We should have him in the penitentiary, ready to be hanged within 30 days. The deputy nodded as the two walked away. Chapter 7. Rip Campbell returned to the cabin unnoticed in the excitement. A grim smile played around his lips. "I'll say this much for Noah. When he said he was willing to die for me, he wasn't talking through his hat. The loyalty of a young fellow is an amazing and beautiful thing." Having made this observation, Rip prepared and ate a good meal, then made his way to Dick Mitchell's general store. He turned his coat up about his ears and pulled his hat down over his eyes. "I want some grub," he explained. "I've made a little strike, so I'll pay you for it in gold." "Gold?" Mitchell's interest quickened. "I haven't used my gold scales in years. Where's the strike?" "Didn't say," Rip answered briefly. "It'll be mostly bacon, flour, sugar, coffee, and you know what I need." Several men gathered around and began to ask questions. Rip put them off with evasive answers and walked about the store, peering into showcases. When he opened the poke and displayed the nuggets, the men were 6 deep around him. Mitchell weighed out the gold, and his fingers seemed to caress each nugget. "As pretty gold as I've ever seen," he said. "Where'd you say it came from?" "Didn't say," Rip replied again. A friendly hand fell on Rip's shoulder. "Say, old-timer, have a little drink." "Nope," Rip snapped. "Still, it's been a long time since I had a good snort of whiskey." He accepted the bottle and eyed it with approval. "Well, one little drink never hurt nobody." He swallowed an ounce or two. "Ah, that hit the spot." "Take a swig of mine," urged a second man. "You'll never be the same man again. It'll knock 10 years off your life." "If it don't knock my teeth out," Rip retorted. He drank again. After that, he refused. "Nope," he told them. "If I drink too much, I'll be talking, and I can't afford to do that." "Well, just one more won't hurt," a persuasive voice insisted. "No, all right, this is the last," Rip declared. He drank frequently, and presently began to sing. They joined in, calling him good old High Manning. He mellowed. "Say, you're all nice boys," he said thickly. "I can see you're men of discretion. I'm going to tell you a Leela secret. There's gold up on Sundown Creek. I took out $2,000 in nuggets inside." He looked around in bewilderment. "Where'd everybody go?" "I'm afraid you've started a stampede," Mitchell said. "You mentioned Sundown Creek, and by tomorrow noon there will not be an able-bodied man left in town." He slapped Rip's shoulder. "You'd better go home and sleep it off. Come around in the morning, and I'll have the grub ready to throw on your burrows." "Thanks," Rip Campbell muttered, "thanks." In the darkness, he grinned broadly. No all night there were sounds of hasty departure, but Rip slept peacefully. Things were moving along so smoothly that luck appeared to be with him. Noah had conveniently appeared to shoulder the responsibility of Beasley's well-deserved death, and Rip had tricked the town's famous manhunters into stampeding. At 10 o'clock, Rip dusted himself with ashes once more and started for Mitchell's with one burro. He passed through a narrow space between the bank and a building, then turned into the main street. Mitchell was sleepy, but cheerful. "They just about cleaned off my shelves," he said. "This town was sure ripe for a stampede. Someday I'll learn to either quit drinking or keep my mouth shut when I do drink," Rip answered. He carried several packs to the burro, divided the load, and threw a diamond hitch over it. "I'll be back in about 15 minutes, he said. He turned back between the bank and building again, stopped the burro, and pulled a black shirt over his head. A moment later, he drew on a pair of worn overalls, jerked a battered black hat from a cache in the brush, and pulled it down over his eyes. He covered his face and neck with a handkerchief, leaving slits for the eyes. His hands were perspiring from nervousness that did not otherwise show outwardly. He was about to do something he had failed to do once, and which no man had successfully accomplished. He watched, saw a man enter the bank, then leave it. The street was now deserted. Those occupied were indoors, and the unoccupied portion of the town's population was hurrying to Sundown Creek. Rip cut around the corner, and in 3 strides was in the bank. With gun drawn, he leaped over the counter and was behind the cage before the teller realized it. The president was sitting in his office. He reached for a gun and changed his mind. "Keep your hands up," Rip barked, "both of you." "That's fine. Now, back into that little room." He indicated a washroom back of the vault. "You are getting better every minute," he drawled, closing and locking the door on them. He leaped into the teller's cage and scooped up all the currency in sight, then walked into the vault. Gold was too heavy to carry, so he searched for currency, stuffing the neat bundles into a small bag. 5 minutes after he entered, the job was done. He slipped out unobserved, cut around the corner to the burro, and shed the clothing he had used in the raid. At the barn, Rip hid the currency in his packs, then, taking the second burro, plodded up to the store. The banker and his teller had not escaped yet. Rip was loading the second burro with Mitchell's help when the banker emerged. "Hold up. Hold up," he bellowed. "That can't be," Rip muttered. "I ain't seen nor heard a thing." "Nor I," Mitchell agreed. He ran toward the banker. "When did it happen, Ned?" "Right now, you crazy fool," Ned roared. "Where's everybody? Get a posse, throw it around the town. He can't be far." "What sort of a feller was it?" Rip yelled. "Big man, black shirt, overalls, and black hat. Had his face covered, but I saw his eyes. Blacker'n night. He was a young man, straight as an arrow." "Where's the deputy sheriff?" "Gone on the stampede," Mitchell answered. "I sold him grub last night." Several old men hurried up and asked questions. They ran stiffly for guns and mounted the horses the stampeders had left behind. Mitchell closed his store and joined them, while Rip Campbell and his burros moved slowly toward Sundown Creek. 2 miles from town, he changed his direction toward Calico Springs. 5 miles beyond that, he peered intently into a thicket. A beautiful bay horse snorted defiantly, then calmed down under the understanding touch of his hand. "Easy, Jerry. Easy now. You're sure full of ginger, aren't you?" Rip picked up a saddle, cached in the brush, and threw it onto Jerry's back. He transferred the currency to the saddlebags, cached the grub in the brush, and released the burros. Leaping into the saddle, he grinned defiantly back at Wagon Gap. Well, it was done, and done right. Rip chuckled. His spurs touched Jerry's flanks, and the horse moved away, heading toward Calico Hole. Rip approached cautiously, half expecting someone to be lying in wait, hoping to intercept him. Evidently, those back at Wagon Gap were still tracking the bank robber's trail. As no one was visible, Diego's band was cleared, and the crime was credited to a lone wolf. Rip rode into the hole unchallenged, but the guard called down, "What luck?" "Plenty," Rip shouted back. "Good. I took some of the 20-to-1 money you wouldn't put over. Not bad, though I could have gotten longer odds if I'd waited. Where's Noah Ford?" Rip briefly explained, then rode on, knowing he had to face Nora before the night was over. That moment came sooner than expected. Nora stepped into the trail and waved him down near the graveyard. It was growing dark, and they were out of sight of the cabins. "I've been here ever since Noah left," she cried. "Where is he? What happened?" "He's not hurt, Nora, but he's in a jam," Rip assured her, dismounting. "Beasley forced a sale and took over your place. Noah met him and killed him. He had it coming 1,000 times over. They're holding Noah for trial." "Is he charged with murder?" she asked in a dull voice. "Yes, that's what I heard." "You'll see him through," she pleaded. "You'll promise me that, won't you, Rip?" "I promise. I'll see him through." "They'll never hang him," Rip insisted. "Oh, my darling," she cried brokenly. "You're a good friend. And I've been a friend to you. Listen, do you remember the little black mare with the star in her forehead? You couldn't forget her, because she knew you and somehow linked you with the past. Well, I tried to find out where she came from, but no one would tell me. She was dangerous to you, and so that night it was I who turned her loose. I was sure she went home." "Horses do that," he said. "Would it be to your home, Rip?" she asked. "Likely," he answered. "And you? Did you succeed?" His arm was around her slim waist, her tragic eyes searching his face. "You are priceless," he whispered. "Yes, I got away with it. I followed my plan and had some luck, not a shot fired. Now, I'd better report to Diego." He kissed her, and she clung tightly to him, then walked beside him until they were in the shadows of Diego's cabin. In parting, she noticed the horse for the first time. "He's beautiful. Where did you get him?" she asked. "I roped him on my way to Wagon Gap, had him tied and waiting for me. I call him Jerry," Rip said. "He looks like a horse that'd be called Jerry," Nora observed. She patted his neck and was gone. Rip dismounted and knocked. Diego's voice answered, and the outlaw leader wasn't happy about Rip's return. He had expected failure, had hoped and planned for it. He expected both Rip and Noah to be killed or arrested, or perhaps Rip wouldn't return, and he could make a deal with Nora. But Rip stood before him, and that meant Diego had been denied the chance to rob the bank and add to his infamy. His face betrayed nothing but pleasure, though. "Ah, my friend, you came back. That means—" "Exactly," Rip interrupted. "And here's the money. Count it." He carried the currency on his arm, as if it were firewood. It thudded softly to the table, and El Severo's eyes lit up greedily. Diego roughly estimated the total at $30,000. "I expected 50,000, maybe more," he said. "But you did a good piece of work. Where's Noah?" "In jail for killing Beasley in a gunfight," Rip said bluntly. Diego betrayed nothing at first, but then his face lit up as he saw possibilities in the situation. He repeated. "It will cost a lot of money to clear him." "I know where to get it," Rip said. "It's a tough job, but it can be done if you've got a dozen men who aren't afraid of a fight." "Where?" "The bank at El Rio," Rip replied, tossing a sheet of paper on the table. "I saw this on the president's desk. There were several copies, so I took one." Diego glanced at the paper and read, "Relative to the sum of $100,000 indebtedness of the El Rio State Bank to the Wagon Gap State Bank, please be advised We have informed the various ranchers to whom the money was advanced that the loan must be paid. We have assurance the entire sum will be available on the 20th of next month and will be forwarded as you instruct. You want to ease up, and so do I, Diego, and that looks like our chance. If I'm now a member of your band, I'll take your orders. If I'm an outsider, then I'd like to pull out, pick up a few good men, and go after that money myself. What's the answer? Diego drummed on the table with long, artistic fingers. The cigarette in his lips drooped, glowed, then grayed across the burning end. Smoke came from his lips slowly. You are a member of the band, my friend, the outlaw answered. Join the others and await orders. No, all right, but first I think I'll wash off the dirt and enjoy a good shave, Rip replied. As he left the room, El Severo, who had been watching, came over and joined his chief. Chapter 8. Diego slept soundly after his discussion with El Severo and woke feeling well pleased with himself. True, Rip Campbell had done the unexpected, looted the bank and returned safely, but he had brought $30,000 and information of $100,000 at El Rio. True also, Rip had not run away and forfeited Noah Ford's life, which would have allowed the outlaw to drive a good bargain with Nora. On the other hand, Noah would require considerable money for defense, so Diego could still drive a bargain. He was bright and cheerful at the breakfast table, and his men, who feared him, warmed under his geniality. After breakfast, he motioned to Nora. My pretty friend, I have something to tell you in private. Won't you come in? Yes, Nora answered without hesitation. I want to talk to you too, she said, seating herself and looking about the room. El Severo appeared, but Diego waved him aside. After a moment's hesitation, the dumb one departed. The girl began the conversation. Noah is a member of your band, Mr. Diego, she said, and is to be placed on trial. He was not engaged in my work. Rather, he insisted on joining Rip Campbell in a private enterprise, Diego interrupted. You got the loot, she bluntly stated. Noah's in jail. Are you going to leave him there? His defense can be arranged. I shall speak plainly. A shade of apprehension crossed her face, then returned to its normal calmness. You have been here in my hands for 2 months, my friend. My rule here is absolute. I hold the life or death of every living thing in Calico Hole in my hands. Even so, toward you I have not been, let us say, offensive. You've been a gentleman for reasons of your own, she answered. Go ahead, and let's hear the rest. I am almost ready to marry and settle down. My wife will wear beautiful clothes and will never soil her hands with work. I could marry you by force, but you are a fury when aroused. Sometime there would be a reckoning, and I'd be killed by your knife or bullet. Yes, there would be a reckoning, she assured him. But you would keep your word and make good on a bargain, he went on, so I'll make a bargain. If you will marry me, I'll stop at nothing to free your brother. If he's convicted, will you go down and rescue him by force? She countered. Yes, he replied. You don't like me now. You hate me, he went on, but in time you would change and we would be happy. After all, I'm no ordinary man. I'm the greatest of the wanted men in the Southwest. Even the pride of the Rangers, Jesse Temple, won't risk his reputation against me. When I'm about, he looks the other way and leaves Texas for a rest. I'll think it over, Diego, the girl said in a toneless voice. He stood up and bowed as Nora left the room. The door closed, and Diego was alone with his thoughts, which were decidedly pleasing. He ruled by fear and power. He knew, too, Rip Campbell and Nora Ford were drawn toward each other. He wasn't so sure about Rip, but in 100 ways the girl had betrayed an attachment for the man. He enjoyed blasting this possible romance by sheer force, and was not perturbed that evening when he saw the two meet and walk toward the falls. Nora did not beat around the bush, but got to the point at once. What would you say, Rip, if I married Diego in return for Noah's freedom. She saw him wince, and some of the color left his bronze cheeks. If I didn't understand what Noah means to you, he said at last, I'd say you were a fool. But if he means that much, and there's no other way, then it looks as if you'll have to accept Diego's offer. The reason I came to you, Rip, she said, is because I thought you might figure the way out of this. A man who can successfully plan and carry through the robbery of the Wagon Gap Bank should see a way out of my problem. I've so much faith in you, Rip. It was a gracious tribute to his ability. Rip caught his breath sharply, and his arm swept her to him with crushing force. Nora, he cried, I love you. Then I shall refuse Diego's offer, she asked. You know time is limited, and we must move fast. Yes, that's the tough part of it. Time is limited. He scowled at his feet as they walked. Diego knows it. Who would have thought, when I decided to throw in with Diego, a situation like this would happen? If you just give up your original plan, she urged, we would get out of here some way, then see Noah through. That is impossible, he crisply informed her. I'm going ahead, hoping for the best. Then, she snapped, turning on her heel, I don't mean a darn thing to you, and you've failed me. There's only one thing left for me, Diego's offer. I'm going to accept. Oh, be still, she cried angrily. A man who really cared for a girl would. Oh, what's the use of talking? You don't understand anything, nor care for anybody but yourself. I'm going to get in one word, he growled. Be sure you don't marry Diego until Noah is in the clear. Will you promise me that? Yes, she flung over her shoulder as she hurried away. Her fists were clenched, and tears were running down her cheeks. At first, they were angry tears. Then they changed to the tears of a girl who was grievously disappointed in the man she loved. Diego was smoking and walking the piazza, and as she neared her cabin, he saw her. His eyes narrowed and he smiled. He knew when a girl was angry with her lover, and experience had taught him that when a girl is blinded by anger, she is inclined to do foolish things. There is a very human desire to want to show somebody a thing or two. Nora, he called softly, have you made up your mind? Yes, she answered desperately. I'm going to accept your bargain. Ah, you make me happy. 1 minute, please. He moved with his tigerish stride into the cabin and returned a moment later with a diamond ring. Stolen, he said proudly, 5 years ago and treasured until this hour. He slipped the ring onto Nora's finger, conscious that her hand felt like clay. He bowed and kissed the hand, mockery in his eyes, while she stood rigid until he released her hand. The first link in the chain he was forging to hold her was gold. Now, what are you going to do about Noah? She asked. In the morning, you shall leave for Wagon Gap, provided with money, he promised. Then it had better not be money Rip Campbell stole from the bank, she suggested, or they'll arrest me too. It shall be money I received in an honest transaction, my sweetheart, the sale of rustled cattle. Good night and pleasant dreams, he said softly as she ran up the steps and entered her cabin. The following morning, carrying $5,000, she arrived at Wagon Gap and checked into the best hotel, a 2-story brick building next to the bank. The deputy sheriff in charge of the district, having returned from a wild goose chase to Sundown Creek, promptly called. He did not bow nor kiss her hand, but he was polite and smiling, though firm. I've got to ask you some questions, Miss Ford. Where have you been the last 2 months? I haven't been robbing any banks, nor aiding anyone in a jailbreak, she answered evenly. Noah broke out of jail with Rip Campbell's help. They called at our ranch and rode on to Calico Hole. Noah was sick, and I did what any sister would do, followed him into the hole and cared for him. If that's a crime in Texas, you're going to have a sweet time getting a jury of Texans to convict any girl for doing as I have done. And she smiled right back at him. I'm here to see Noah is given justice, something he did not get before. I have been provided with money, Not stolen money either. And I'm going to send for Jesse Ritchie to act as Noah's attorney. I've no quarrel with you, miss, the deputy answered. Noah did get a wrong deal from Beasley in jail. Beasley controlled politics, and things happened that some of us liked none too well. Your brother is in the left cell at Calico Hole, and you may visit him. However, you must remember Noah has been with Diego, also that he did kill Beasley, an officer who was trying to arrest him. I'm not forgetting that for a moment, she told him. That is why I'm hiring Jesse Ritchie. The deputy took his departure, confident he had not been talking to a woman outlaw, something he thought possible when he first called. Nora remained in her room that evening, but an open window brought voices from the street, and she listened attentively, trying to gauge the townsfolk's temper. To a man, they were in an angry mood, but it was the anger of smart people who had been cleverly outwitted. They had found no gold at Sundown Creek. The bank had been robbed during their absence, and a genial old prospector had vanished. It looked like a Diego job. How much longer, they asked each other, would the Texas Rangers let the outlaw get away with his raids? How many of you want to walk into the hole and get him? Someone asked. There's $10,000 reward on his head, and you don't see me trying to collect, nor you. There ain't men enough in this part of Texas to take that hole. I used to be a ranger, myself. Jesse Temple may have drifted when Diego's name was mentioned, but the rest of the outfit hasn't quit. Now that Beasley's dead, we've got a chance to do a little house cleaning hereabouts, and I'm in favor of it. So let's quit bellyaching, because Diego, or whoever it was, got us out of town and robbed the bank. After that, the tone of the men on the street changed, and Nora felt Noah would at least receive justice. Ritchie stated he would arrive within a week. Nora was reading this when Molly Geary called. She was followed by her father, who twisted his hat in his hand and unburdened his conscience. Nora, he growled, I told Molly if she had anything to do with Noah, I'd horsewhip her. And I would have. I was wrong. The way Beasley swooped down on the Twin F told me there was something queer about it. I snooped a bit and found Delaney, a friend of Beasley's, did brand Twin F calves. Noah complained, and they just laughed at him. Being hot-tempered and young, he threw in with Diego, and that's just what was wanted. Noah got caught, and Beasley tried to murder him by degrees in that cussed cell. So far, it looks as if you were right, Nora said. Darned right I'm right. Chris Geary roared. Come to think about it, 2-3 small ranchers died in jail, and later Beasley picked up their ranches for a song. Well, I said to myself, Chris Geary, Molly's the finest gal in the world, and she's in love with Noah. Noah's getting a raw deal, so by gosh, Chris, back them young kids to the limit. So I'm here. Nora, we'll mortgage that ranch and throw the money into the pot for Noah's defense. Chris, you're grand, Nora exclaimed, wiping her eyes. But the money's been provided. Shall we go over and see Noah, Molly? Oh, can we? Molly cried. Nora, with the Gearys, walked to the jail on the edge of town. A new jailer greeted them and answered Nora's request. Sure, you can see him. We don't stand for any nonsense, but we give a prisoner a square deal. There's a telegram from Jesse, a change, you see, and Noah brought it about. If he'd been an honest citizen, I'd bet even money a jury would call it self-defense. But being one of Diego's men, that makes a difference. Here he is. You can talk to him through the bars. Nora started to run forward, then checked the impulse. Go ahead, Molly, she whispered. Noah drew Molly's slender arms through the bars, and she slipped them around his neck. Their lips met, and low words passed between them. Chris came over after a while and shook hands. Noah caught his breath. Chris's presence was almost too much for him. With you backing me, Nora, and Rip Campbell in the play, I can't lose, Noah said with confidence. Did Rip say he'd get you out of this? Nora cried sharply. That's the impression he gave. I'd never hang for Beasley's death. What Rip says goes with me, he added. Now tell us what happened. Nora insisted. Beasley saw me. I offered to surrender. Then I saw by his eyes he was going to kill me and call it self-defense, so I let him have it. I had to, Noah concluded. That's the way it must have happened, the jailer observed. It's his story, and he's sticking to it. Nora stuck to the story when Jesse Ritchie arrived and took on the case. The judge proved to be a mild little man with silver hair and keen gray eyes. He had a habit of peering over the top of his glasses at witnesses, and another habit of trapping those who lied on the stand. We will go over and look at the exhibits in this case, he informed Nora and Molly the second day after his arrival. It's going to take more than a mere statement that Noah killed in self-defense. We've got to prove it. The exhibits consisted of the weapons taken from Noah and the bullet removed from Beasley's body. This is the bullet? Ritchie asked. And this is the gun it came from? Yes, Judge, the prosecutor answered. And this is Noah's gun? The judge inquired, turning to Nora. Yes, of course, the girl replied. Then she looked closely, and a protest burst from her lips. This is not Noah's gun at all. It's a gun I've never seen before. I swear it. See the notch on the walnut butt plate. She pressed her hand to her mouth and concentrated her thoughts. Wait. I have seen that gun before. It is one Diego gave Rip Campbell when what? The prosecuting attorney asked sharply. Nora had come within an inch of saying, when Rip set out to rob the Wagon Gap Bank. She choked back the words and said calmly, when Rip explained he needed a gun. Ah, yes, the prosecutor murmured. Jesse Ritchie said. This is important, Miss Ford. It suggests that perhaps Noah did not kill Beasley after all. This Rip Campbell may have made it appear the boy did the killing. Let's talk it over with him. I'll do the questioning, if you please. The judge hurried to the jail, his movements like a hound's on a fresh scent. Noah, he said, peering over the tops of his glasses. That wasn't your gun that killed Beasley. Surprise flashed over Noah's face, then his emotions were neatly masked as he sensed someone, probably his sister, had identified the weapon. No, that's not my gun, he admitted. It's Rip Campbell's. He didn't like the balance and I did, so we traded several days before I left the hole. Very interesting, Jesse Ritchie drawled. They left the jail, and when a safe distance from possible listeners, the judge said to Nora, your brother is lying. He is shielding somebody. Can it be this Rip Campbell? Again, his eyes peered over the glasses. Are you keeping anything from me? Rip robbed Wagon Gap Bank, Nora said. He was disguised as an old prospector and tricked the manhunters into going out of town. She saw a glint of admiration in the judge's eyes. Noah went along against my wishes to give Rip help if he needed it. It is well you told me, but we'll not mention the robbery at the trial. Otherwise, if we are given an acquittal on the self-defense issue, the state will hold Noah on the grounds he aided in the bank robbery. This, my dear girl, is a complicated case. I'd like to talk to Campbell. Huh? Nora sniffed. You won't get anywhere with him. He's a queer person, stubborn as a mule. I can't do a thing with him. But I'm not forgetting one thing Noah once said. He was telling me about Rip, breaking jail and taking him along. Rip risked his life again and again that time, and Noah said I owe him my life. It's a debt I'll never forget to pay. Jesse Ritchie pulled thoughtfully at his jaw. Many years as a trial judge in Western courts had taught him a keen insight into men and their motives. And your Noah has decided to pay the debt, he said softly. The boy has set his jaw on the matter, nor dare we bring up the bank robbing affair. I guess we'll have to fight it along the lines he's insisting. He killed Beasley in self-defense. The two girls exchanged helpless glances, but Nora did not give up hope. She was all for law and order, and she hated violence, preferring to build rather than tear down. But she had Diego's promise that he would release her brother by force if need be. On this she pinned her hopes. There was, however, the disturbing possibility the prisoner, if found guilty, might be immediately removed to state's prison and beyond Diego's reach. "Now what'll we do?" Molly cried. "We'll just have to wait," Nora answered. "And you must be prepared to go wherever Noah goes, and go in a hurry. Don't ask me any more questions, because I can't answer them. Let's try and keep up our courage until after the trial." Courage ebbed and flowed in the days that followed. Jesse Ritchie worked on Noah Ford from various angles, but he could not induce him, either by pleas or threats, to change his mind. "You're protecting an outlaw, and I know it," the judge stormed the day before the trial. "Your courage should be directed toward a worthier object. Hang it, boy, don't you realize the best I'm hoping for is a life sentence?" "That's the best I'm hoping for," Noah answered. He couldn't tell him of Rip's promise to see him through his trouble, but his faith never wavered. The trial was brief. A jury of grim Texans listened attentively to the evidence, heard Ritchie's dramatic plea, then prepared to retire to the jury room. "How long will they be here?" Molly asked. "I can't tell you, my girl," Ritchie answered. The men disappeared into a room, and the door was locked. Hours passed, and the judge and court officials disappeared. The girls waited endlessly, refusing Ritchie's invitation to eat. Night fell, and they returned to the hotel. At 2 o'clock, a knock came at the door. "It's the clerk. Are you awake?" "How can we sleep?" Molly cried in anguish. "What's happened?" "The jury's reached a verdict," the clerk said, "and messengers have been sent for the judge and the others. I thought you'd like to know." "Thanks," Nora answered. They leapt from bed and dressed hurriedly. On the street, it was cold. Their footsteps broke the silence of night. The stars hung bright and low. Here and there, a cat slunk from view. Some houses had lights on. Others, having heard the news, were dressing. The courtroom was filled when they arrived, with sleepy people grouped along the walls. The judge stepped to the bench, and the jury was brought in. Nora searched each face and learned nothing, except the men appeared tired, as if they had hotly argued. The judge asked the foreman if a verdict had been reached, and the foreman said, "Yes, Your Honor." He passed a slip of paper to the clerk, who gave it to the judge. The judge glanced briefly at it and said, "Read it, Mr. Clerk." The clerk droned. "We, the undersigned jury, do find Noah Ford guilty of murder in the first degree." The room was silent, except for the ticking of a large clock and the soft rustle of clothing. Then there was a convulsive sob. Molly Geary crumpled to the floor, and Nora thought of a hen quail hit by a charge of shot. She leaned down and patted the girl's shoulder, but kept her eyes on the judge. "Noah Ford, stand up." Noah got to his feet and faced the judge. He was tall and straight, but still underweight. His eyes were clear, and his chin was up. "Molly, look," Nora whispered. "You must get up." "Yes," the girl said. She got to her feet. Her face was like chalk, and she grasped Nora's arm for support. "Look. He's our man, Molly, and he's brave." "Yes, that's it. He's brave. I must find something to cling to, or I'll go crazy." Now Molly was the stronger, and it was her arm that supported Nora. "Have you anything to say?" the judge asked. "Is there any reason why sentence should not be passed on you now?" "None, Your Honor," Noah replied evenly. "But there is something for you to say, Noah." Nora clawed her way through the others and grasped Noah's arm. "This is your last chance, Noah. Speak up and tell everything." The judge leaned slightly forward, his eyes intent. Ritchie removed his glasses and said, "Speak, Noah." You've shielded him long enough. Noah Bareford, is there any reason why sentence should not be passed on you now? The judge repeated. None, Your Honor, Noah said again. Then he faltered, moistened his lips, and repeated. None, said. It is the judgment of this court that you be taken to the state penitentiary, and there, on the 30th day of this month, be hanged by the neck until dead. 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 His voice echoed against the walls. Noah stared beyond the judge to the stars. He seemed like one in a trance. And may God have mercy on your soul. The deputy sheriff gently pushed Nora and Molly aside as the prosecutor said, Your Honor, in view of Diego's outlaws and the fact the defendant is a member of the band, I suggest he be taken immediately to the penitentiary. I fear there may be some attempt to rescue him. The judge frowned. This court yields to Diego or no one else. The usual procedure will follow, he thundered, angered at the mere suggestion of danger from Diego. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. Outside, it was dark and cold. The two girls walked slowly toward the hotel, arm in arm, and after a while Nora spoke. Be ready to go anywhere with Noah, Molly, she said. Anywhere, anytime. They entered the lobby. Run upstairs and go to bed. I'm going to write a letter. She seated herself at a desk and wrote a note to Pedro Diego and one to Rip Campbell. Chapter 9. An Indian boy brought the two notes to the barbed wire in Calico Hole, where the guard held him, and sent for Diego. The outlaw, El Severo, and Rip came down to the wire. The former accepted the notes, glanced briefly at the envelope addressed to Rip, and read, It's from Nora. Go back to your cabin. This is yours, and there'll be no answer. The outlaw leader opened his own message and read, Pedro Diego, Noah sentenced to hang the 30th. He will be taken away sometime after the 22nd. Come and get us before then. Alice. Diego smiled softly, then his eyes narrowed. I shall borrow from Campbell's plan and arrange to divert a few manhunters. He sent back to his cabin for paper and envelopes, then wrote the first note to Nora. It read, My darling, I shall not fail you and will strike when the time is ripe. Your Pedro. See that the lady gets this, he directed the Indian boy. He then wrote a second note. My darling Nora, I shall attack the Wagon Gap jail in force sometime on the 20th and rescue Noah. Please be ready to leave with me at that time. Pedro Diego. He gave this also to the native boy. Tell the deputy sheriff at Wagon Gap, a strange man gave you this, and the man looked like he might be one of the Diego band. Ask him what to do about it. I am sure he will read it. Diego smiled and gave the boy a $20 bill. Go. And don't mix up the letters. Rip Campbell's letter was brief and carried a sting. Dear Rip, they are going to hang Noah on the 30th. Throughout the trial, his courage was perfect, and his lips remained closed when by opening them he could have found freedom and happiness with as brave a girl as ever breathed. Even though he would not talk, I can read between the lines. Your gun, in evidence, helped. I want you to know he is discharging his debt to you in full. Nora Ford. Rip read the letter over several times and found no comfort between the lines. He saddled Jerry and rode around the hole, staring with unseeing eyes at the falls, the rich pastureland, and the orderly fences dividing cattle and horses. A debate raged within his breast, but in the end he shook his head. No, it's too late to turn back now. Happiness for me, if any, is ahead. If I come through the raid on El Rio's bank alive, the trail will be easier. I should drag 10,000 out of the affair, maybe more. I can do a lot on 10,000. As the 20th drew near, Diego said nothing of the proposed ride to El Rio, which lay 40 miles over the mountains. On the morning of the 19th, Rip awakened to find only a handful of outlaws at breakfast. The others had disappeared during the night. He asked no questions, but he walked out to the corral after dark and eyed Jerry speculatively. "You're a good horse, Jerry, and sometimes I think you know it and take pride in it." He fed the horse some sugar. "I think we'll be in action soon." Diego's cabin was dark when he returned, and Rip crawled into his own bunk to sleep, or, if he couldn't sleep, to review the exciting events of the past few weeks. At 3 o'clock, Diego awakened him. "Get up," he ordered. "We're riding." Together, they went down to the corral. Some of the horses were standing close together, others were down in the pasture. Diego roped two, one for himself, and the other for El Severo. "What's the matter? Why aren't you saddling?" the outlaw leader asked sharply. "Can't find Jerry." "Take another horse, then." Diego shot a glance at the rim of the hole. "First thing we know, it'll be daylight." Rip roped a strong horse and saddled it. El Severo was waiting for them at the big cabin. He vaulted into the saddle and jerked and spurred his spirited animal into submission. Diego seemed to be undergoing a change each moment, as the tiger in the man, always close to the surface, revealed itself. "We're riding to El Rio," he told Rip. "You lead the way." "With your guns on my back," Rip thought. "You don't trust me yet." "Well, it's mutual. I don't trust you either." They were over the mountains by daybreak, and could see the twinkling lights of El Rio in the valley. By 10 o'clock, they had approached the outskirts of the town over a seldom-used road. Diego halted. "My men sifted into the town yesterday, one at a time. They're cowboys, in town for a good time, and are stopping at the different rooming places. We swing into action at 11 o'clock. Anybody on the street who gets in the way will be killed, understand?" "Yes." Diego was the complete tiger now, tense, alert, and snarling. When a Texas Ranger attacks a man in a gunfight, he kills him in his mind the instant he lays eyes on him. His natural shooting instincts do the rest. "That's what you're to do, Campbell," Diego explained. "Sure. This is your test. If you run out, we'll drop you in your tracks." "The only thing I ever run out of was the Wagon Gap Jail," Rip retorted. "I figure to cut in to the tune of 10,000 on this deal. Watch me, Diego. I'll be around." "You drift across the street from the bank," Diego went on. "Drill anybody who comes around either corner of the building. The rest of the boys know what to do without orders. They've been through this before." "So have I," Rip retorted. El Severo's glittering eyes were studying Rip, searching for something on which he could lay the finger of suspicion. Rip felt inwardly nervous at such times, but was outwardly nerveless, following his companion's code: kill when in the slightest doubt. "There'll be a deputy sheriff loafing around somewhere," Diego concluded. "I'll take care of him." Rip rode ahead, and he noticed Diego and El Severo remained together, the former again leaning on the dumb one's sensitive instincts to detect the slightest danger. A deer, stalked by a mountain lion, could not have been more alert. El Rio was like 100 other southwestern communities, a main street with the more substantial buildings, structures sandwiched in between. Several intersecting streets made a brave effort to carry on the town's growth, but trailed into dust and were lost in the brush pressing in on all sides. Rip followed one of the intersecting streets and turned the corner into the main thoroughfare. "Quite a few strangers in town," the man was saying to a companion. "You might think the Texas Rangers was sneaking into camp. That's the way they trickle in." The other chuckled. "Any Rangers in these parts are over to Wagon Gap, fixing to surprise Diego. Seems like an Injun boy gave a note that he was supposed to pack to Noah Ford's sister to the deputy. Ripjid, if it didn't tell about a rescue. Diego has rid to his last fight," the old man concluded. "You don't say," the other exclaimed. "That's where our boys must be, over there lending a hand." Rip grinned. So, Diego had borrowed his trick of ridding a community of manhunters. He's beginning to appreciate my real worth, he mused. Well, here's the bank. And there are a couple of the band. One was examining his horse's hoof, the other searching his pocket for a match to light a cigarette. A clock in the bank showed 5 minutes to 11. 5 long minutes to wait, Rip said. Then your men will die. He looked into a store window briefly, then walked down to the corner and lit a cigarette. It was 11 o'clock when he returned to his place opposite the bank. Diego was sauntering toward it. El Severo was coming from the other direction, and suddenly the air was charged. El Severo slowed up sufficiently to permit Diego to enter the bank ahead of him. No recognition passed between them, but the dumb one was 5 feet behind his chief when they reached the teller's cage. How about cashing this? Diego softly suggested, and Rip saw him hand the teller the sheet of paper stating that on the 20th, there would be $100,000 available in the El Rio Bank. Why? Faltered the teller. We never wrote Wagon Gap any such letter. We don't owe them a dime. His hands were in the air, and he began to talk fast. El Severo's instincts warned him, and a horrible cry came from his throat. It was the first sound Rip had heard him utter, and it was wrenched from him by a sudden realization of dire peril, coupled with a madness to kill everything in his path. Kill Campbell. Diego snarled, then leapt through a side window. He was running when his boots touched the ground, and El Severo came behind him. El Severo's hand flashed, and Rip saw the flames spurt from the muzzle of his .45. A bullet creased his shoulder. So it's one of us, Rip cried, and he ran toward the dumb one whose gun was spurting lead. Diego was cutting in at one side, trying to save himself from gunfire while reaching for his horse. His deadly eyes roved, his lips snapping orders to his men, who were pouring from nearby structures ready to shoot their way clear. El Severo dropped a gun and drew a second from his holster. His rage was disturbing his aim, and as yet Rip had not fired. He was running toward the dumb one, further to shatter his nerve. Retreat would have meant instant death, for he had seen El Severo shoot on occasion. 100 feet from the man, Rip's gun cracked, and El Severo's arms went back as if stretching. He shuddered from head to foot. Then, his face twisting into a snarl, he tried to bring the gun to bear once more, to kill one more man, and that one the man he believed had tricked him into a trap. Rip did not fire again. He knew a second shot would not be necessary, and there was still Diego to reckon with, and he did not know how many others. 3 of the outlaws ran down an alley, only to return, running low and yelling. Texas Rangers. A voice shouted, "We'll wipe you out." It was a voice that filled half the town, and only one man in the Southwest had one like it. Tex Crawford, who had been in the Rangers since he was a youngster. One of the outlaws dropped his gun and thrust his hands into the air. Tex turned, and the man went for a second gun like a flash. Tex whirled and fired. The outlaw pitched onto his face in the street. Rip slunk along a wall, raced across an open spot, and leaped into the saddle. A gun cracked, and he almost fell to the ground, but setting his teeth and grasping the saddle horn, he managed to stay up. His heels went into his horse's flanks. "Light out, boy," he shouted, and the animal responded. A half-block away, Diego was running beside his frightened horse, trying to mount and make his escape. "Get back," he snarled at Rip. "Don't draw their fire this way. Diego. You can't get away. You haven't a chance. The Rangers have surrounded El Rio, and Jesse Temple is here to accept your invitation for a showdown. He's here to settle with you for killing his brother." Diego's horse reared and went down as a bullet struck it. The raider got clear with a tigerish spring and dove into the brush. Rip jumped from his horse as a 6-gun spurted lead and followed Diego. "I know you now," the outlaw snarled. "Yes, you know me now, Diego," Rip retorted. His eyes were flaming, matching the killing light reflected in Diego's eyes. Each was following the ranger's creed: to kill the enemy in your mind as you attack. Diego was never more deadly than at that moment. His gun roared, and the bullet went true. Dust puffed from the front and back of Rip's shirt. He almost went down, but his gun steadied. He checked the sagging knees and fired. Diego's face turned gray, then a horrible red. He set his teeth and went down. "What's next?" Rip said thickly. Darkness rushed on him like a thundercloud. His ears roared, then he was lost in the blackness. Far away, a voice whispered, "Ripgoodest fight I ever seed, each got the other." When Rip Campbell opened his eyes, a doctor was bending over him, shaking his head as he ordered, "Don't try to talk. Telegraph the governor and tell him to pardon Noah Ford," Rip gasped. "I killed Beasley. He was one of Diego's men. I'm Rip Campbell," the doctor said to several others in the room. "You heard that? This man confesses to killing Beasley." He looked back at Rip. "Don't worry, we'll telegraph the governor at once." Blackness came to Rip again, but far away he heard voices, and one said, "Biggest cleanup the Rangers ever made. Got every member of the Diego gang, including this fellow. Thieves fell out, I guess, and they settled it with 6 guns less than 100 feet apart." Another voice came fainter. "We'll operate, but it won't do any good." The darkness did not last forever, and finally Rip saw sunlight. He looked at 2 wasted hands and saw that they were his. He tried to lift one, but it was too heavy. "I've been sick," he whispered. "You've been dead for a week," Tex Crawford boomed. "They had to do some work on you, boy. And the doc must have done a good job because he's all puffed up over the fact you've pulled through. And still enough of a doctor to worry over my patient," the doctor cut in. "Go to sleep." Rip slept, and when he awakened, lips lightly touched his forehead. A small hand was lifting his, giving it warmth and strength from the contact. "Nora," he whispered without opening his eyes. "Yes, Nora," the girl said in a low, shaky tone. "You didn't fail Noah, did you, my darling? You confessed to killing Beasley and saved him." "Yes. I'd have done it sooner, but I had to take part in this raid. $10,000 is a lot of money." He spoke slowly and with effort. "Besides, I knew if he was in jail, he couldn't ride with Diego and get killed." "And he would have been killed, Rip," Nora cried. "The Rangers gave the band a chance to surrender, but it meant hanging to be caught, so they tried to shoot their way out. That's twice you've saved No's life. The governor says No's slate is wiped clean, so he's going to marry Molly on the 15th of next month. They're going to get the twin F back again and run it as 4 generations of Fords have done." "And you?" he asked. "I'll wait until you've served your term, whatever it is, Rip. Then we'll be married. There couldn't be anybody but you, ever, my darling," she said. "Serve what term?" Tex Crawford bellowed. "My gosh, girl, do you think he's an outlaw?" "Dog my cats, but I don't know what the younger generation is coming to, a girl marrying a man without knowing who he is. Why should that make a difference?" "It makes a whale of a difference this time. This cuss tried to rob Wagon Gap Bank, and here's why. He wanted to be arrested, thrown in jail with Noah Ford, so Noah could get him into the Diego gang as a reward for pulling off the jailbreak," Crawford explained. "Yes, that's clear enough," Nora said. "Rip needed $10,000 to develop a ranch he's had in mind a long time," Crawford continued. "And Diego offered one way of getting it. Everything went along fine, except he had to actually rob the bank in order to win Diego's confidence, so that later he might be tricked into leaving Calico whole, and thus give the Rangers a fair chance at him. Texas Ranger. And so, this here chump writes another glorious page in Ranger history now." Nora answered. "Then ups and quits the outfit so he can marry a girl and invest $10,000 reward money in developing Calico whole into Calico Ranch," Crawford boomed. "Rip," she said. "You're a ranger?" Many things were clear now, chiefly that this man had guarded her brother throughout at the risk of his own life. "But if I'm not going to be Mrs. Rip Campbell, who am I to be?" "Why, bless your little heart," Tex replied. "You're going to be Mrs. Jesse Temple, wife of the ranger who spent his vacation avenging his brother's murder." "Mrs. Jesse Temple," softly. "Sounds nice, don't it?" Crawford suggested. "Here's the check for $10,000 for Diego, dead or alive. What'll I do with it?" "Give it to Nora," Mr. Jesse Temple said. "She'll get it as soon as we're married anyway. Besides, she earned it a long while back. It was one night in Calico Hole. My brother's mare recognized me and came up to the fence. I slapped her, and Nora saw the whole affair. She knew that mare connected me with my real identity, but she not only let me play my hand through, she turned the mare loose and relieved me of a menace that might have betrayed me to Diego. She saved my life." The end.